They poisoned me at my own celebration dinner, and they laughed while they did it. My wife lifted her champagne, my best friend clinked his glass against hers, and somewhere between the second course and the dessert, I couldn't feel my hands anymore. "To Adam," Eleanor said, smiling at me with those soft brown eyes I had trusted for 6 years. "To the most generous husband in the world." I smiled back like the absolute clown I was. I even thanked her. 20 minutes later, I was on the marble floor of our dining room, my throat closing, my vision folding in on itself like a wet newspaper. And the last thing I heard before the dark swallowed me whole was Gareth Stone, my sworn brother, the man whose company I saved from bankruptcy 3 separate times, leaning down to whisper in my ear, "Don't fight it, brother. The paperwork's already signed. Just go to sleep." I thought that was the end. Credits roll. Adam Thorne, self-made billionaire, dead at 34 of a tragic sudden cardiac event. How sad. What a loss. Please hold your applause. Then I opened my eyes. The first thing I noticed was that the dining room ceiling looked wrong. Too far away. The crystal chandelier I had personally imported from Vienna for $400,000 was hanging up there like a distant galaxy, and the underside of the mahogany table stretched above me like the hull of a ship. The second thing I noticed was that my hands were gone. In their place were 2 small black paws with pink pads and, God help me, little tufts of fur between the toes. I tried to scream. What came out was a squeak. A hand reached down and scooped me up, warm and gentle, and lifted me to a face I knew better than my own. Eleanor, my wife, my widow. She was holding me against her chest, and she was cooing. "Aren't you the sweetest little thing?" she murmured, rubbing a knuckle under my chin. "Look at those eyes. Poor baby. Somebody dumped you right outside the gate. Don't worry. Mommy's got you now." Mommy. I looked down at myself. 4 legs, a tail. A body the size of a loaf of bread, covered in soft black and tan fur. Somewhere in the fog of dying and whatever came after, I had been shoved into the body of a puppy, and by the cruelest joke the universe has ever told, I had been shoved into a puppy that my murderers had just decided to adopt. I should have been panicking. Any sane creature would have been panicking. But here's the thing about being a shadow in the water of the corporate world for 15 years. About clawing your way up from a leaking apartment above a laundromat to the top floor of the tallest tower in the city. Your brain doesn't stop calculating just because your body changed shape. My body was a puppy. My mind was still the man who once bought out a hostile competitor in 11 days out of pure spite. And so, while Eleanor pressed her cheek against my tiny skull and told me what a good boy I was going to be, my mind was already running at full speed, cataloging, measuring, filing away. She poisoned me. She and Gareth. The paperwork's already signed. I hadn't imagined it. The champagne, the laugh, the whisper in my ear. They killed me, and now here I was, 4 days dead by the smell of the funeral lilies still wilting on the sideboard, being cradled against the chest of the woman who did it. Eleanor carried me into the living room, still cooing, and set me down on the very same rug where I used to do my morning stretches. Then she straightened up, and the softness fell off her face like a mask dropping off a wall. "Ugh," she said, wiping her hand on her silk robe. "It smells like a gutter. Why do strays always smell like that?" Behind her, a man walked in holding 2 glasses of red wine, and every hair on my new little body stood straight up. Gareth Stone. My brother in everything but blood. The man I met at 19 when we were both sleeping in our cars outside the same job fair. The man whose wedding I paid for, whose mother's cancer treatment I quietly covered, whose name was on the company charter right next to mine because I insisted on it, because that's what you do for family. He walked into my living room, in my house, wearing one of my robes, and he handed a glass of my 40-year-old Bordeaux to my wife. "Relax," he said, kissing Eleanor on the temple like he'd done it 1,000 times, because he had. I could see it now. God, I could see all of it now. "You wanted a dog for the optics. Grieving widow adopts a poor little stray to fill the empty house. The board eats that stuff up. 2 weeks of that and nobody's going to ask a single question about the will." The will. I sat very still on the rug, ears up, and I listened. "How long do we have to keep up the act?" Eleanor said, sinking into the couch and folding her long legs beneath her. My couch. The one I'd fallen asleep on watching quarterly reports 100 nights while she was at yoga. "The reading's in 9 days," Gareth said. Once the estate transfers, you're the sole beneficiary, and I'm the acting CEO. Then we let a respectable amount of time pass. The widow and the loyal partner find comfort in each other. Very natural, very tragic romance. And by spring, the whole thing is ours, free and clear. 400 million in liquid assets, the tower, the shares, the offshore accounts he didn't even bother hiding well. He swirled his wine and looked, for a moment, almost thoughtful. You know, I actually feel bad. He really did think I loved him. Eleanor laughed. It was a light, easy, genuinely amused laugh, the kind you laugh at a joke that's a little bit mean but mostly just true. You did love him, she said. You loved everything he owned. They clinked glasses. Over my dead body. Over my literally, recently, chemically induced dead body. And I, Adam Thorne, formerly the 9th richest man in the province, currently a 9-pound puppy with a bladder I did not yet have full control over, sat on my own imported wool rug and made myself a promise. You threw a dinner for the man you murdered. Fine. Let's throw a dinner for the man you couldn't. This time, I'll pick the guest list. This time, I'll pick the ending. I wagged my tail. I had to. She was watching, and a good little stray wags his tail. But behind those 2 black puppy eyes, I was already writing the invitations. It was right then, as I sat there plotting the downfall of 2 adults from a height of 8 inches off the floor, that a soft blue light bloomed in the corner of my vision, and a line of glowing text unrolled across the empty air where only I could see it. Welcome back, host. I flinched so hard I fell over sideways. Eleanor glanced down. Careful, dummy, she said, without a shred of warmth, and went back to her wine. The text hovered patiently in the air, waiting for me to write myself. When I had scrambled back onto all 4 of my unfamiliar paws, more words appeared. Revenant protocol is now active. You have been returned to the mortal plane in a temporary vessel to resolve an unjust death. That death is your own. Great, I thought, because apparently thinking loudly was enough. A system. Of course there's a system. My whole afterlife is a cheap web novel. Acknowledged. Host demonstrates hostility and sarcasm within the healthy range. Beginning orientation. Then the numbers appeared, and my blood, or whatever runs through a reincarnated dog, went cold. Primary directive. Deliver your murderers to justice before your body is cremated. Upon cremation, the tether binding your soul to the mortal world will sever permanently, and this vessel will become an ordinary animal. Your consciousness will disperse. There is no second chance after that. Time until cremation, 9 days, 4 hours, 11 minutes. 9 days. I looked up at the 2 of them on the couch, laughing softly at something on Eleanor's phone. Comfortable, victorious, certain. They had scheduled the reading of the will for 9 days out. They had, I would later learn, scheduled my cremation for the morning after, a neat little full stop at the end of the sentence they'd written for me. Burn the body, transfer the estate, close the file. They thought they were burning the evidence. They had no idea they were burning the clock on the only witness who could bury them. Secondary systems will unlock as you complete objectives, the text continued, scrolling gently. For now, you retain full human cognition, full comprehension of human speech, and heightened canine senses. You cannot speak. You cannot write. You have the body of a 2-month-old puppy. Plan accordingly. The light faded, and I was alone again, in a room full of my own furniture, listening to my wife plan her spring wedding to the man who helped her kill me. Cannot speak. Cannot write. 9 days. The body of a puppy. Anyone else would have curled up in a corner and whimpered. But I didn't build an empire by having good cards. I built it by playing bad ones better than anyone else at the table. So I trotted, wobbling because the legs took some getting used to, across the rug, and I sat down directly at Gareth's feet, and I looked up at him with the biggest, dumbest, most adoring puppy eyes I could manufacture. He glanced down. Huh, he likes me. Of course he does, Eleanor said. You're the one who fed him. Gareth reached down and scratched behind my ear, and it took everything I had, every ounce of the discipline that let me sit across a negotiating table from men who wanted me dead and smile, not to sink my little needle teeth into his hand right there. Instead, I leaned into it. I let him scratch. I wagged. Good boy, I told myself. Be the goodest boy this house has ever seen. Be so good they forget you're in the room, because a dog they've forgotten is a dog that hears everything. And oh, brother, I was going to hear everything. That first night, they put me in a cardboard box in the laundry room with a towel and a ticking clock wrapped in a sock. Apparently, that's supposed to soothe a puppy, mimic a heartbeat, and they turned off the light and left me there in the dark. And in the dark, for the first time since I'd opened my eyes into this ridiculous new life, I let myself feel it. Not the fear, the rage. I thought about the day I met Eleanor, a charity gala 4 years into my success, when I had finally started to believe I was allowed to want things beyond survival. She was the daughter of a faded shipping family, she said, poor but proud, refined but humble, and she cried the first time I bought her a coat because no one had ever taken care of her before. I found out much later, right about now actually, that the faded shipping family was a rented backstory and the tears were on command. She had been placed in front of me, a honey trap with a 9-figure target. I thought about Gareth, and that one hurt worse, because Gareth I chose. Eleanor seduced her way in, but Gareth I walked up to at a job fair and said, "You look like you haven't eaten. Split a hot dog?" I built half of everything I owned to have someone to build it with. And he sat by my bedside in the hospital when I had appendicitis and told me I was the only real family he'd ever had. And then 11 years later, he watched me choke to death on my own dining room floor and told me to just go to sleep. The clock in the sock ticked. 9 days. Fine, I thought. And I stopped feeling sorry for myself, because self-pity is a luxury and I couldn't afford luxuries anymore. Fine. You want to play the long game, the patient game, the respectable mourning period game? You scheduled 9 days of theater before you cash out? Perfect. 9 days is plenty. I've dismantled companies in less. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow, the work begins. Objective updated. Survive. Learn the vessel. Map the house. Identify the evidence. Every villain leaves a paper trail. Yours left too. I woke before dawn to the sound of the coffee machine, and I began. The first lesson of being a dog in the house of your enemies is that you are invisible in a way no human spy could ever be. I spent that first full day simply moving through the house, and no one paid me the slightest attention beyond the occasional "not there" or absent-minded pat. Eleanor took a call in the study with the door open. She never would have done that in front of a person. And I lay in the hallway with my chin on my paws, apparently asleep, and I listened to her tell someone named Mateo that the transfer's on track, and no, the sister's not a problem, she was written out years ago, and stop calling this line, use the other phone. The other phone. Noted. There's a second phone. Burner. Probably where the real conversations live. Gareth left for the office at 9. My office, my tower, my 43rd floor corner with the view I'd earned one brutal deal at a time, wearing my watch. Not a watch like mine, my watch. The Patek my mother saved for 2 years to buy me when I made my first million. The one thing in my entire collection that actually meant something. He'd taken it off my dead wrist and put it on his living one. I sat at the top of the stairs and watched him admire it in the hall mirror before he left, and I made a very specific, very cold note in the ledger I was keeping behind my eyes. The watch, I told myself. When this is over, I want the watch back. Everything else, they can burn. But I want the watch. By evening, I had a rough map of the house committed to memory. Not that I'd ever forgotten it, but I needed it from this new, low, useful angle, the world of table legs and undercouch and the gaps beneath doors. And I had confirmed something crucial. They were sloppy. Not stupid, but sloppy in the specific way of people who believe they've already won. Eleanor left her laptop open. Gareth spoke freely on the phone in rooms with the doors ajar. They talked over dinner, my food, my table, as if the walls were deaf. They forgot the walls had a witness. They forgot they'd adopted him themselves. On the second night, they made their first real mistake. I was lying under the dining table, precisely where I had died, chewing on a rawhide bone with the theatrical dedication of a creature that has no thoughts in its head, when Gareth set a leather folder on the table and slid it toward Eleanor. "The amended will," he said. "Signed, witnessed, notarized. Everything goes to you. The company voting shares go into a trust I control until the estate stabilizes." He made little quote marks with his fingers. "Which is to say, forever." He actually signed this? Eleanor said, flipping through it. He signed a lot of things in the last month, Gareth said, and there was something in his voice, something proud and ugly. You'd be amazed what a man signs when his trusted partner hands him a stack of documents and says, routine, routine, sign here, initial there. He never read past the first page in his life, trusted me to read it for him. He laughed, low. He literally paid me to read the fine print so he wouldn't have to. So I read it, and then I wrote a better one. I stopped chewing. The will was forged. Not entirely. My signature was real, tricked out of me page by page in the last weeks of my life, buried in stacks of ordinary paperwork by the one man I'd never in 1,000 years have double-checked. But the document those signatures were now attached to was a lie. And that leather folder, sitting on the table 8 inches above my head, was the single most dangerous object in the house. To me. And, I realized with a slow, spreading heat, to them. Because a forged will is not just their weapon. It's their throat, bared. If the original, real will still existed somewhere, and it did, I knew it did because I was a paranoid man who kept redundancies of everything, then the document in that folder wasn't proof of their victory. It was proof of their crime. Find the real will, I told myself. Find it, protect it, and put it in the right hands before they burn me. That's the whole game. Everything else is noise. I knew exactly where it was. Of course I did. I'd hidden it myself, 18 months ago, during a bout of the low-grade dread that visits every man who has more to lose than he can carry. There was a safe behind the false back of my study closet, a safe not even Eleanor knew about, and inside it was the real will, the one that left 40% to my sister Chloe, the one that named 3 independent directors to keep Gareth honest, the one that included a sealed letter I'd written on a bad night that began, "If you're reading this, then I was right to be afraid." I was right to be afraid. I just hadn't been afraid of the right people. I'd been afraid of competitors, of markets, of the faceless forces that eat rich men. I never once thought to be afraid of the 2 faces I loved most. Get to the safe. It should have been simple. It was, it turned out, nearly impossible, because I was a puppy who couldn't reach a doorknob, let alone a wall safe with an electronic keypad, and the study door was kept closed. And even if I got in, and even if by some miracle I got the safe open, I could not exactly carry a legal document down to the police station in my mouth and file a report. Cannot speak, cannot write. The body of a puppy. You are learning the shape of the problem, the system observed, unhelpfully. Good. A problem understood is a problem half solved. Then who solves the other half? I thought sourly. You do, with allies. A dog cannot testify, but a dog can lead. Objective, find someone who will follow. Someone who will follow. I turned it over in my mind that night, in my cardboard box, with the sock clock ticking down the hours I didn't have. Everyone in my life had either killed me or been written out of my life by the people who killed me. Except 2 people. The first was my sister, Chloe. Younger than me by 6 years, an art restorer, allergic to everything I'd spent my life chasing: money, power, the tower. We drifted, the way siblings do when one of them becomes a headline. But the drift was Eleanor's doing. I understood that now. Eleanor had spent 4 years quietly poisoning the well between us. A comment here, a slight there. Your sister seemed cold at dinner. Did I do something? Until Chloe and I only spoke at holidays, and even then like polite strangers. Eleanor had told the lawyers Chloe was written out years ago, which meant Chloe didn't know she was, in the real will, my primary heir, and the one person I trusted to protect the company's soul. The second was Arthur, my driver. 51 years old, ex-military, hands like cinder blocks, and a heart he kept carefully hidden behind a professional's silence. Arthur had driven me for 9 years. He'd never once been late, never once repeated a word he heard in the back seat, and exactly once, 3 years ago, when I'd had the flu and no one else noticed, he'd left a thermos of his wife's ginger soup on the seat with a note that just said, "Drink, M." Arthur was not family by blood or by contract. Arthur was family because he'd earned it in 9 years of small, unrewarded decencies. If anyone in this world would look twice at a stray puppy trying to tell him something, it would be one of those 2. I had to reach them, both of them, and I had 8.5 now, days to do it, from inside a house that was a fortress built by my enemies, with a body that couldn't online. The next morning, Opportunity walked in wearing black. Chloe came to collect my things. I heard the car in the drive, and I was at the front window before Eleanor, my paws up on the sill, and when I saw my sister step out, smaller than I remembered, her eyes swollen, a folder of estate matters clutched to her chest like armor, something in my dog heart cracked clean in half. She'd been crying. She was still crying, quietly, the way people cry when they've been doing it for days and their bodies just decided that's the baseline now. She was crying for me. In a house full of people celebrating my death, one person had actually loved me, and she was standing in the driveway blinking up at the house where it happened, gathering her courage. Eleanor met her at the door with a hug and a face I recognized, the tragic widow face, calibrated to perfection. Chloe, oh Chloe, I'm so glad you came. I know we haven't always. He loved you so much, you know that, right? He talked about you all the time. He did not, in fact, talk about you all the time, because you spent 4 years making sure we barely talked at all, I thought, standing at Eleanor's heel and vibrating with the effort of not launching myself at her ankle. Chloe's eyes dropped to me. You got a dog? He's a rescue, Eleanor said, in the sugared voice she used for me. Somebody abandoned the poor thing at the gate the day after. A delicate pause, a hand to the chest. The day after. I couldn't just leave him out there. It felt like a sign. Like Adam sent him. Oh, I sent him all right, I thought. You have no idea how right you are and how badly it's going to end for you. And then Chloe crouched down, right there in the doorway, and held out her hand to me, and looked into my eyes. And for one impossible second, I saw her breath catch. Because animals know their people. And some deep, wordless part of my sister looked into the eyes of a 2-month-old stray and felt something she couldn't name, something that made her go very still. And I looked back at her with every ounce of Adam Thorne I still had left in me, and I thought, as hard as I have ever thought anything in my life, Chloe, it's me. I know you can't hear it, but it's me. And I need you to be brave, because you are the only family I have left, and they are going to try to take everything from you, and I am the only one who can stop them. And I am a dog. She let out a small, wet laugh, and wiped her eyes and scratched under my chin. Hi, buddy, she whispered. Aren't you sweet? He would have loved you. Her voice broke on loved. Behind her, Eleanor and Gareth exchanged a glance over her bowed head. A quick, silent, satisfied glance. The sister's here. The sister's a mess. The sister suspects nothing. They were wrong about a lot of things, but that glance, that little flicker of contempt for a grieving woman who'd never hurt anyone, that was the moment I stopped thinking of this as a fight for justice and started thinking of it as a hunt. I had 8 days, a sister who needed protecting, an ally I hadn't reached yet, a safe I couldn't open, and a will I couldn't carry. And I had them exactly where I wanted them, comfortable, arrogant, and talking freely in front of the dog. Let's begin, I thought, and I trotted after my sister into the study, my little claws clicking on the hardwood, my tail wagging like a good boy's should, and my mind as cold and clear as the day I'd taken my first company apart, board by board. Round 1. The study still smelled like me. Not like the man I used to be, like the last version of him, the sick, drugged, dying version, a faint sour note under the leather and old paper that only a dog's nose could catch. They'd cleaned the room. They hadn't cleaned it of me. I stood in the doorway and breathed in my own ending, and then I made myself stop. Because grief is a tax, and I had a job to do. Chloe sat down at my desk, with the burn mark on the corner from the cigar I smoked the night I signed my first $100 million deal. The desk I refused to replace because Eleanor hated it, and that was reason enough. Chloe ran her fingers over that burn mark, and she didn't know what it was, and it broke my heart a little that she didn't. That all the small, holy relics of a life become meaningless junk the moment the life is over. Okay, she whispered to herself, opening her folder. Just the personal things. You can do this. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a cup of tea she had no intention of drinking, and I understood instantly that she was not going to leave my sister alone in this room for even 1 minute. Smart. Eleanor was always smart. She just used it for the wrong things. Take whatever feels right, Eleanor said gently. There's no rush. Though the lawyers did say the study needs to stay mostly intact until the estate's settled. Something about the inventory. You know how they are. A soft, apologetic laugh. Bureaucrats. Translation: don't you dare open anything. Don't you dare look too hard. Take a photo and a fountain pen and go home and cry where I can't see you. Chloe nodded, because Chloe trusted people, because that was the family disease, the one that got me killed. Of course, I just wanted... Her voice wobbled. There was a watch. Mom's watch. The Patek. He never took it off. I thought maybe I could, for Mom. She'd want it kept in the family. The room went very still. I looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at the carpet. Oh, honey, Eleanor said, and her voice was liquid sympathy. It wasn't, when they found him, it wasn't on him. He must have left it somewhere, or, you know he was always misplacing things at the end. He wasn't himself those last few weeks. We've looked everywhere. I'm so sorry. It's on Gareth's wrist right now, I screamed, silently, uselessly, from the floor. It's on the wrist of the man who killed me, 43 floors up, right now, this second, while you tell my grieving sister it's lost. And here is the thing that happened next. The thing that told me exactly how much danger my sister was in. Chloe believed her. Of course she did. Why wouldn't she? She nodded and wiped her eyes and said, Of course. Thank you for looking. And I watched my sister thank the woman who murdered me for pretending to search for the watch that same woman had helped steal off my corpse. And I thought, they are going to do to her what they did to me. Slowly, sweetly, with tea and sympathy and apologetic little laughs. And she will thank them the whole way down. Not while I'm breathing. Even if I'm breathing through a snout. I made my move. I trotted across the study, casual, aimless, a puppy exploring, toward the closet in the far corner. The closet with the false back. The safe. I needed Chloe to look there, needed to plant the smallest seed, and I had exactly one tool. I could go to a spot and refuse to leave it. Dogs do that. It's not suspicious, it's just a dog being a dog. I reached the closet door, which was open a few inches, and I nosed inside, and I sat down against the false back panel, and I started to whine. Aw, Chloe glanced over. What's he doing? Ignore him, Eleanor said, a fraction too fast. He does that. He's got a nose for... I think a mouse died in the wall or something. We've had someone out. A mouse died in the wall. I almost laughed. Something died in this house, lady, but it wasn't a mouse, and it's currently sitting 8 inches from the only thing that can hang you. I whined louder. I scratched at the panel. Small, ineffectual puppy scratches, but scratches. Look here. Look here. Chloe, please. There's a wall behind the wall. There's a safe. There's the truth. Just look. Eleanor crossed the room in 4 strides and scooped me up, and her hands, when they closed around my ribs, were not gentle at all. Okay, troublemaker, she said, all sweetness for Chloe's benefit while her fingers dug in hard enough to bruise. Let's get you out of Auntie Chloe's way. And she carried me out of the study and set me down in the hall and pulled the study door shut behind her with a soft, final click and crouched down to my level, and the mask came off just for me, just for 1 second. I don't know what you are, she said, very quietly, studying my face with something that wasn't quite fear but was on the same street as fear. But you're going to stop that. Do you understand me? Whatever you're sniffing around for, you stop. She stood, straightened her robe, put the mask back on, and walked back into the study to babysit my sister, and I was left alone in the hall, defeated, exactly 0 inches closer to the safe. Round 1 to Eleanor. Direct approach failed. Predictable, the system noted in its cool blue script. The enemy is intelligent and watchful. You will not win this with a puppy's tricks. You will win it the way you won everything before. Patience, leverage, and letting the enemy's own arrogance do the heavy lifting. Their own arrogance, yes. That was the thread. They talked and talked, because to them I was furniture, and furniture doesn't repeat what it hears. My job wasn't to break into the safe. My job was to survive 9 days, gather everything their loose mouths handed me, and stay close enough to Chloe and Arthur to put it all in a human hand when the moment came. The moment came faster than I expected, and it started with a phone. That night, after Chloe had gone home with nothing but a fountain pen and a photograph and a fresh wound, Eleanor and Gareth had their debrief. They always debriefed. It was, I was coming to understand, the most dangerous habit two murderers can have: the compulsion to review the day's performance, to congratulate each other, to say the quiet parts out loud in the safety of a house they believed was empty. I lay in the corner of the living room with my eyes shut and my ears wide open. "The sister's going to be a problem," Gareth said, pouring the wine. Always my wine. She wanted the watch. She wanted her mother's keepsake. It was nothing, Eleanor said. I handled it. You handled her tonight. What about the reading? She's going to sit in that lawyer's office in 8 days and hear that she's been cut out of a $400 million estate she probably assumed she'd split. Grieving people do stupid things. She might contest. She might hire someone. She might start asking why her brother, who called her every single birthday for 34 years, supposedly rewrote his entire will 6 weeks before he conveniently dropped dead. Called her every birthday. He knew that. Gareth knew that about me and Chloe. Knew the one steady thread I'd kept even while Eleanor frayed the rest, and he'd filed it away as a liability. That's who he was. Everything a weakness to be managed. Every one a position on a board. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then we make sure she doesn't want to look too closely, she said. We offer her something, a gift from the estate, out of the goodness of our hearts. Enough to feel generous, not enough to matter. $1 million, maybe 2. Grief plus guilt plus a check? She'll take it, and she'll feel dirty for taking it, and she'll never ever pull the thread, because pulling the thread would mean admitting she took blood money. She sipped. People don't investigate the hand that feeds them. They just feel ashamed and look away. Adam taught me that, actually. It's how he ran the whole company. I lay in my corner and I felt sick, because she wasn't wrong. It was how I ran the whole company. And now the technique was being turned on my sister by my wife, and the worst part, the part that made my stomach turn under my fur, was how well I could see it working. Fine, Gareth said. But that's the estate side. That's the clean side. I'm more worried about the other side. He lowered his voice, and even a dog had to strain. Delgado called me again today. The name went through me like a current. Delgado. Mateo. The name Eleanor had said into the study phone. Stop calling this line. Use the other phone. He's getting greedy, Gareth went on. The good doctor decided that $500,000 for a signed death certificate and a very creative cause of death isn't enough anymore. Now that he's had a few weeks to think about how much we actually got, he wants $2 million. Or he remembers that the cardiac event looked a little chemical. My whole body had gone rigid. I forced it loose, forced my breathing slow, kept my eyes shut. Do not react. You are asleep. You are a sleeping puppy, and this is just the sound of the ocean. But inside, I was on fire, because there it was, the second paper trail. The system had told me my killers left 2. One was the forged will, the crime dressed up as an inheritance, and the other was a man. A crooked doctor named Mateo Delgado, who had signed my death into a lie for $500,000 and now wanted 4 times that to keep the lie sealed. A blackmailer, a loose thread, a weak point in a chain that was only as strong as its most frightened link. Find the doctor, I thought. The will can convict them of theft. The doctor can convict them of murder. So pay him, Eleanor said, bored. I'm not paying a blackmailer $2 million every time he gets a big electric bill, Gareth snapped. You pay a man like Delgado once and he owns you forever. No. We handle Delgado the way we handle every recurring problem. A pause. A sip. Permanently, after the estate clears. One more accident. This city's very dangerous for doctors who drink. And Eleanor laughed, that light, amused laugh, the one she'd laughed over my dying body, and she said, God, I love how your mind works. And I lay in the corner of my own living room and listened to the 2 people I had loved most in the world casually plan a second murder to cover up the first. And I made 3 cold notes in the ledger behind my eyes. 1. The doctor is real. He is named Mateo Delgado, and he is scared and greedy, which makes him the softest target in this entire structure. 2. They are going to kill him, which means the doctor and I now want the exact same thing: for me to reach the authorities before Gareth reaches him. 3. Somewhere in this house, Gareth has a second phone, the burner, the other phone, and on it is every text, every call, every damning word he's exchanged with the blackmailing murderer. That phone is not evidence of one crime, it is a confession of all of them. Get the phone. I opened one eye, just a slit, and I looked at Gareth across the dim room. He'd set his glass down and taken his suit jacket off and draped it over the arm of my couch. And there, in the inside breast pocket, a rectangular shape pressed against the fabric. 2 phones. He carried 2 phones. His real one lived in his trouser pocket, always in his hand. But the other one, the one he only took out when he thought no one was near, the other one lived in the jacket. The jacket that was, at this moment, 11 feet away from me, unguarded, at the exact height a puppy could reach if a puppy stood on his hind legs against the arm of the couch. Not now, not with both of them in the room. Patience, leverage. Let the arrogance do the work. But soon. They finished their wine. They went upstairs to the bedroom that used to be mine, and I heard the door close, and I heard, faintly, the sounds that told me exactly how thoroughly my life had been given away while I was still living it. I put my paws over my ears. I actually did, a strange new instinct, and I waited for the house to go quiet. And when it did, I got up and I went to work. The jacket was still on the couch. I stood on my hind legs, front paws scrabbling against the leather, and I strained upward toward the breast pocket, and I was 2 inches too short. 2 inches. I dropped down, panting, furious, and I looked at the gap between my reach and my target. And I did the thing I had done my whole life when the gap was too big. I found a box to stand on. There was a low ottoman near the couch. I put my shoulder against it and I pushed, my claws skidding on the hardwood. 9 pounds of pure will shoving 40 pounds of furniture 1 agonizing inch at a time. And it took me 20 minutes, and it made a sound like the world's smallest earthquake, and I was certain, every single second, that the bedroom door would open at the top of the stairs. It didn't. The ottoman reached the couch. I climbed onto it, and from the ottoman I could reach the pocket, and I got my teeth into the corner of the phone, and I pulled. It slid out. It fell. It hit the floor with a clack that sounded, to my terrified ears, like a gunshot. I froze, ears up, heart hammering. Upstairs, nothing. The house slept on, secure in its victory. I looked down at the phone lying on my imported rug, screen dark, a slim black brick containing the whole truth. And for 1 triumphant second, I let myself feel it. Got you. Before the obvious problem crashed down on me. Now what? I couldn't unlock it. I couldn't read it aloud. I couldn't call the police, and even if I nosed the screen awake and somehow dialed, what would they hear? Barking. A noise complaint. A crank call from a dog. I couldn't use the phone. But I could hide it. And a burner phone that suddenly, inexplicably vanishes from a careful man's jacket is not nothing. It's a crack. It's the first grain of sand in a machine that had been running far too smoothly. It's the moment the winners start, for the very first time, to feel watched. And a watched enemy makes mistakes. I took the phone in my mouth. It was heavy, and the metal was cold and awful against my tongue. And I carried it, low and quiet, out of the living room, down the hall, toward the one place in that house I was certain neither of them would ever look. The laundry room. My cardboard box, my towel, my sock clock, still ticking, still counting down. I dug a hollow under the towel in the corner of the box, and I dropped the phone into it, and I covered it, and I lay down on top of it, a 9-pound puppy guarding a 9-figure secret, and for the first time since I died, I let myself feel something other than rage. I felt the old thing, the good thing, the thing that had gotten me off the floor above the laundromat and into the tower in the sky. Not hope, exactly. Hope is soft. This was harder than hope. This was the certainty, bone deep and cold and clean, that I was going to win. Objective complete. Secure first evidence. Reward unlocked. The blue light blooms in the dark of the laundry room, and new words scrolled where only I could read them. Minor vessel enhancement. Scent memory. You may now perfectly recall and distinguish any scent you have caught. You will never lose a trail. You will always know who has touched what and where they have been. The nose remembers what the eye forgets. 6 days, 19 hours remaining, the system added. The clock does not care whether you are winning. Move faster. I lay in the dark with the phone under me, and the doctor's name in my head, and the smell of my own death still faint in the study down the hall, and I did not sleep. I planned. Tomorrow, Arthur was coming to return the keys to the company car and collect the last of my personal effects from the garage. Arthur, the one man left in the world who might look twice at a dog trying to tell him something. Tomorrow, I would reach him. And if I couldn't make a soldier understand me, a man who'd spent 9 years reading my silences in a rearview mirror, a man who'd left ginger soup on a car seat without being asked, then I didn't deserve to win, and my killers deserved every dollar they'd taken off my corpse. But I did deserve to win, and they deserved nothing but the specific, patient, total ruin I was building for them. One stolen phone and one loose word at a time from 8 inches off the floor. Sleep well, wife, I thought, up through the ceiling, toward the room that used to be mine. Sleep well, brother. Enjoy the wine. Enjoy the watch. Enjoy every last easy night you have left. You adopted a witness, and the witness is just getting started. The panic started at 7:40 the next morning, and I got to lie in my box and enjoy every second of it. I heard Gareth come down the stairs too fast. I heard him check the couch, then check it again, then lift the cushions, one by one, and drop them. I heard the specific silence of a careful man realizing something is wrong. And then I heard him say, low and tight, the 2 words that told me my grain of sand had found the gears. Where is it? Where's what? Eleanor, still half asleep, from the top of the stairs. The other phone, the Delgado phone. It was in my jacket. It's not in my jacket. A beat. You probably left it at the office. I did not leave it at the office. I never take it to the office. That's the entire point of it. His footsteps, fast, back and forth across the living room. I put it in the breast pocket last night. I always put it in the breast pocket. It's gone. Then you dropped it. Look under the couch. I looked under the couch. I lay in my box, on top of the missing phone, and I have never in either of my lives enjoyed a sound more than I enjoyed the sound of Gareth Stone's composure developing its very first hairline crack. For weeks, these two had moved through the world like the house always wins, because for them, the house always had. Now, at 7:40 in the morning, over a cheap black burner, Gareth was learning the oldest lesson in my old world. The house only wins until it doesn't, and it never sees the turn coming because the turn always comes from the one player it stopped counting. They tore the living room apart. They checked the kitchen, the study, the garbage, the car in the drive. Eleanor, to her credit, kept her head. It's a burner, Gareth. It's not connected to anything. Even if a cleaner took it, it's a locked brick. Calm down. But Gareth couldn't calm down, and watching him not calm down told me more about him than 4 years of dinners had. Under the charm, under the loyal brother act, Gareth Stone was a man who lived in terror of exactly one thing: losing control of the story. Kill a man, forge a will, plan a second murder over wine, all fine, all manageable, all just moves on a board. But an object going missing that he could not explain? A variable he couldn't see? That was the thing that turned his face gray. Remember that, I told myself. His weakness isn't greed, and it isn't guilt. He has neither. His weakness is that he needs to feel like the smartest man in the room, and he cannot bear the feeling of being watched by something he can't identify. So let's make him feel watched. Let's make this whole house feel watched until the smartest man in the room starts jumping at shadows and telling the shadows his secrets to make them stop. They gave up at 8:15 because Gareth had a board meeting he couldn't miss. The board meeting where the acting CEO would reassure everyone that the company was in steady hands during this difficult time. My company, my board, my steady hands rotting in a freezer while his warm ones took the wheel. He put on his jacket. My jacket, technically. He'd started wearing my clothes. They were tailored close enough. He put on my watch. And on his way out, he stopped in the doorway of the laundry room and looked at me. I looked back at him with the blank, wet, idiot adoration of a 2-month-old dog, and I wagged my tail against the cardboard. Thump, thump, thump. And I thought, as loudly and as clearly as I have ever thought anything, "It's under me, Gareth. The phone is under me. Everything you're afraid of is 8 inches under a sleeping puppy, and you will never, ever look there, because you decided what I was the day you named me, and a man like you never revisits a decision he's already made." "Stupid animal," he said, and left for work. Stupid animal. I filed it away with the watch and the wine and the whisper in my ear. The ledger was getting long. That was fine. I had always been a patient bookkeeper. Arthur came at 10. I heard the company car. I would know the sound of that engine anywhere. I'd approved the purchase order for it myself, and I was at the front window before Eleanor had finished her coffee, paws on the sill, and when the door opened and Arthur climbed out, slow and careful the way big men over 50 climb out of cars, something in my chest did a thing I did not expect. It hurt. It just hurt. Because Arthur had dressed up. He was wearing a suit that didn't fit him quite right, a suit he'd clearly bought for funerals and worn to maybe 3 in his life, and he'd put a black band around his arm, and he stood in the driveway for a second and looked up at the house where his employer of 9 years had died. And I watched this enormous, silent, unsentimental man take off his cap and hold it against his chest for exactly 5 seconds before he put it back on and squared his shoulders and walked up to ring the bell. Nobody told Arthur to mourn me. There was nothing in it for him. His contract was with the company, and the company was Gareth's now, and the smart career move for a driver was to forget the dead boss and impress the living one. Arthur wore a bad suit and a black armband and grieved on a stranger's driveway because 9 years ago a sick man had once left him a note, and Arthur was the kind of man who paid his debts even when the creditor was in the ground. That's my ally, I thought. That's my soldier. If I can't reach him, I can't reach anyone. Eleanor answered the door in full widow. "Arthur, thank you for coming. I know this is hard for everyone." "Ma'am?" He held out a key ring. "The car keys and the fob for the garage. And there's a box of Mr. Thorne's personal effects from the office that Mr. Stone asked me to bring by. Photos, mostly. His desk things. I didn't want them to just get thrown out." He didn't want my desk things thrown out. This mountain of a man had personally boxed up my photographs so they wouldn't end up in a dumpster, and he'd driven them across the city on his own initiative, and he was standing there apologizing for the imposition. I could have howled. I did the next best thing. I got between Eleanor's ankles and Arthur's feet, and I looked up at Arthur, and I did the thing. Here is the thing. For 9 years, every single morning, when Arthur opened the car door for me, I greeted him the same way. It was a joke, an old dumb joke that started our 2nd year together after he mentioned offhand that he'd done 20 years in the Army. Every morning, I'd stop before I got in the car, and I'd bring my hand up to my brow, and I'd give him a crisp, ridiculous, deadpan salute. And every morning, without ever once smiling, Arthur would return it, a real one, sharp, from the elbow, and then open the door, and neither of us ever said a word about it. 9 years. Rain, snow, the morning after my father's funeral, the morning I found out about the merger falling through. Every single day, the salute. It was the most consistent relationship in my life. It was, I understood now, standing 8 inches off the ground, one of the only honest things in it. I could not salute Arthur. I did not have a hand. But I had watched, in my first 3 days as a dog, the other dogs in the neighborhood on their walks, and I had noticed the trick they do, the sit up and beg, both front paws off the ground, tucked to the chest. And so, in the doorway, with Eleanor's hand already reaching down to shoo me back, I planted my back legs, and I sat up, and I brought both front paws up to my chest, tucked and still, and I held it. I held the closest thing a dog's body can make to a salute, and I looked Arthur dead in the eye, and I did not break. Arthur went still. I watched it happen. I watched a man who had not reacted visibly to anything in the 9 years I'd known him. Not to gunfire in his past, not to my worst tantrums, not to a car accident on the interstate that put us both in the hospital. I watched that man look down at a 2-month-old stray sitting, up with both paws tucked to its chest, holding a pose no one had taught it, holding it, staring up at him, and I watched something move across his face like weather across a mountain. "Huh," he said, very quietly. "He's a funny little thing." Abraham said, scooping me up before I could hold the pose 1 second longer, her voice bright and dismissive. Rescue. He does all sorts of strange things. Probably a circus dog somebody dumped. She was smiling, but her arms around me were iron, and I felt her heartbeat kick up just slightly against my side. She'd seen Arthur go still. She didn't know why. She didn't like it. Arthur looked at me in her arms for a long moment. Then he looked at Eleanor, and his face was a professional's face again, closed and courteous. Sure, he said. A funny little thing. He set the box of my photographs down inside the door. I'll leave these here, ma'am, if there's ever anything else. And he turned to go, and every cell in my body screamed after him. No, not yet. You saw it. You felt it. Don't you dare drive away. And then I remembered the car. I remembered what was in the car. I twisted in Eleanor's arms, hard, sudden, a puppy having a puppy fit, and I yelped, and I wriggled, and I made myself so much unpleasant squirming trouble that she said, "Ugh, fine," and set me down, just to not have me clawing her silk. And the instant my paws hit the driveway, I was gone, streaking past Arthur's legs toward the company car, and I did not stop until I reached the rear passenger door, my door, the door I'd climbed out of 10,000 times, and I stood up against it, and I scratched, and I barked, and I would not stop. Because I was a paranoid man. I have said this. And a truly paranoid man does not keep only one copy of the thing that can save his life. He keeps a copy in the safe behind the false wall. And he keeps another copy somewhere no one who came for the first copy would ever think to look. And 18 months ago, on the same bad night I sealed the real will in the study safe, I had driven myself for once, given Arthur the night off, and I had taped a small waterproof pouch to the underside of the rear seat frame of the company car, in the dark, with my own hands, and inside that pouch was a USB drive, and on that USB drive was a scanned copy of the real will, the real one. The one that left 40% to Chloe and named the independent directors and included the letter that began, "If you're reading this, then I was right to be afraid." I had forgotten about it. In the chaos of dying and coming back wrong, I had genuinely forgotten. The scent memory the system gave me hadn't done it. The memory that did it was older, human, the memory of my own fear on a bad night. And now it was the most important object in the world, and it was 15 feet from a man who might, if I could only make him understand, actually look. "Whoa, whoa," Arthur said, following me to the car. "What's got into you, little man?" "Look under the seat," I begged him, scratching at the door. Arthur, you spent 9 years learning to read me from the front seat. Read me now. There is something under the back seat, and it is the only thing standing between my sister and total ruin. Look." "He's not right in the head," Eleanor called from the porch, and now there was a thread of real tension under the lightness, because a smart woman does not like watching a strange dog make a scene at the exact car that belonged to the man she killed. "Arthur, don't mind him. Just leave him. He'll tire himself out." But Arthur had already opened the door. He opened the rear passenger door, my door, and I shot inside, onto the seat, and I turned around and I put my nose down against the crack where the seat cushion met the frame, right above the pouch, and I scratched, and I whined, and I looked up at Arthur, and I put my nose back down, and I scratched again, the clearest sentence a dog can write. "Here. Here. Here." Arthur leaned in. And Arthur, who had spent 20 years in the army and 9 years reading a rich man's silences and his entire life noticing the things other people walked past, reached his big hand under the back seat, into the dark, along the frame, and his fingers found the edge of a waterproof pouch that had absolutely no business being taped to the underside of a company car, and he went very still for the second time in 10 minutes. "Arthur." Eleanor's voice from much closer now. She'd come down off the porch. She was crossing the drive, and the widow was gone from her voice, and what was left was something flat and careful and cold. "What are you doing?" Arthur straightened up. His hand, I saw it. I saw exactly what he did, and I loved him for it with the whole of my ridiculous dog heart. His hand came out from under the seat closed, and on the way out it went smooth and easy into his jacket pocket, and by the time he was fully upright and facing Eleanor, his hand was empty, and his face was a wall. "Dog dropped a toy back here, looks like," Arthur said. "Chewed up thing. Left it. Figured I'd get it before it rattled around." He shrugged, a mountain shrugging. "Old habits. I don't like a messy car." Eleanor looked at him, looked at the seat, looked at me, sitting there, panting, the picture of a dumb, happy dog who'd found his toy, and I watched her weigh it, watched the calculation run behind those soft brown eyes I'd once mistaken for warmth, and I watched her decide, this time, that a driver tidying a car and a stray making a scene added up to nothing. "Right," she said. "Thank you, Arthur. That's all we need." "Ma'am?" He tipped his cap. He did not look at me again, which was the smartest thing he could have done, and it told me he'd understood at least this much. Whatever had just happened, it could not happen in front of her. He got in the car. He started the engine. And as he backed out of the drive, for 1/2 of 1 second, his eyes found mine through the window, and he gave me a look I had seen exactly once before, in a hospital bed over a thermos of ginger soup. It was the look of a man who has decided to pay a debt. Then he was gone, down the drive and into the city, carrying a USB drive with the real will on it in his jacket pocket, and I sat on the driveway in the cold spring sun, and I shook, actually shook, with something too big to be called relief. The will was out of the house. The will was in the one pair of hands in the world I trusted. And somewhere across the city, a man in a bad funeral suit was going to sit in a parking lot and open that pouch and find a USB drive. And he was going to be a careful, methodical, ex-military man about it, and he was going to plug it in, and he was going to read the words, "If you're reading this, then I was right to be afraid." Objective complete. First ally reached. Real will secured beyond enemy walls. Reward unlocked. The blue light again, warm in the daylight where only I could see it. Minor vessel enhancement. Endurance. The vessel matures. You are stronger, faster, and steadier on your feet than a dog your age should be. You will need it. The easy part is over. From here, the enemy stops feeling safe, and an enemy who stops feeling safe stops being careless and starts being dangerous. 6 days, 4 hours remaining. Behind me, on the porch, Eleanor stood very still, watching the empty driveway where the car had been, and her arms were crossed and she was chewing the inside of her cheek, a thing she only did when a deal wasn't sitting right. She looked down at me. I looked up at her, a happy dog, tail going, and I gave her the biggest, dumbest, most innocent face in my whole arsenal. "You," she said softly, "are more trouble than you're worth." You have absolutely no idea, I thought, wagging. But you're gonna find out. We've got 6 days. Let's not waste them. I did not know, that afternoon, what Arthur did with the USB drive. I only learned it, later, in pieces. But I know now, so let me tell it the way it happened, in the places I couldn't see, because that's the only way you'll understand how close the whole thing came to falling apart. Arthur drove 3 blocks, pulled into the empty back corner of a supermarket parking lot, turned off the engine, and sat with the pouch in his lap for a full 10 minutes before he opened it. He was not a man who liked surprises, and everything about a waterproof pouch taped under a dead man's car seat was a surprise. When he finally opened it and found the USB drive, he did not have a computer. He was a driver. So he did the most Arthur thing possible. He drove to the public library, sat down at a terminal in the corner with his back to the wall, and plugged it in. He read the will. He read the part where Adam Thorne left 40% of everything to his sister Chloe. He read the names of 3 independent directors who were supposed to keep a man named Gareth Stone from ever controlling the company alone. And then he read the letter, the one on the last page, dated 18 months ago, and when he got to the line that said, "If anything happens to me that looks natural, it wasn't," Arthur put both his big hands flat on the library desk and sat very, very still, the way he'd sat still in the doorway when a puppy saluted him, because Arthur was beginning to understand that he had stumbled into the middle of something with a body count, and he was holding the only proof. Here is what Arthur did not do. He did not call the police. A 51-year-old driver with no standing, holding the USB drive he found under a car, accusing the new acting CEO of a major corporation and the grieving widow of murder on the strength of a dead man's paranoid letter? He knew exactly how that phone call ended. It ended with him unemployed, discredited, and, if Gareth Stone was the kind of man who could poison the friend who saved his life 3 times, quite possibly dead in a ditch by Friday. So Arthur, being a careful man, did the careful thing. He made 2 copies of the drive at the library. He mailed 1 copy to himself at a P.O. box. And then he called the one person he knew who carried a badge and owed him a favor and could not be bought. A life insurance fraud investigator named Laura Wells. Laura Wells was not a cop exactly, and that turned out to matter enormously. She was better than a cop for my purposes. She worked for the consortium of insurers that had, collectively, just been asked to pay out a $50 million keyman life insurance policy on the sudden death of one Adam Thorne. And the thing about a $50 million payout is that the people writing the check are extremely, professionally, unsentimentally interested in whether the death was real. Wells had opened a routine file on my death the day the claim was filed. Routine. A formality. She'd been about to close it. Natural causes, signed death certificate, board-certified physician, no red flags. When a man named Arthur, who had driven the deceased for 9 years and whom she'd met once at a charity thing through her late husband, called her out of the blue and said, in his flat, quiet way, "Laura, I've got something you need to see. And I need you to promise me that if it's what I think it is, nobody knows it came from me until it's too late for them to do anything about it." Wells had been doing this for 19 years. She knew the sound of a man who was scared for a good reason. "Where and when?" she said. They met that night. She read the will. She read the letter. And Laura Wells, who had spent 19 years watching people murder each other for money and dress it up as bad luck, looked at Arthur across a diner table and said the sentence that turned my whole afterlife from a desperate gamble into an actual, structured, winnable case. "A will and a scared letter isn't proof of murder," she said. "It's proof of motive. If I take this to anyone now, Stone lawyers it into dust and buries you both. But motive, plus a body, plus a bought physician, plus a money trail? That's a case." She tapped the table. "I need the body re-examined before it's cremated, and I need it done quietly. And I need something linking Stone or the wife to the actual cause of death. You get me that, Arthur, and I will end these people. But the clock is the problem. When's the cremation?" Arthur told her. 6 days. Laura Wells was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Then we've got a lot to do and no room to be wrong even once." And she pulled out a legal pad, and across the city, in a laundry room, a puppy who could not possibly have known any of this yet lay on top of a stolen phone and felt, for no reason he could name, the first faint warmth of something like an army assembling. The clock was the problem. The clock was always the problem. But for the first time since I died, the clock had 2 sides. It was counting down toward my cremation, yes, toward the moment my soul scattered and the case died with the last witness. But it was also, now, counting down towards something else. A re-examination of a body that would show, to anyone who knew to look, the specific chemical signature of the poison that Dr. Mateo Delgado had been so handsomely paid to call a heart attack. My enemies had scheduled my cremation to destroy the evidence. They didn't know they'd also scheduled the deadline for the one investigator who could read that evidence. And they didn't know that a driver and a dog were racing them to it. 6 days. Everybody running at the same finish line. Some of us on 4 legs. Back in the house, things got worse before they got better, because that is the shape of every real fight. Eleanor had not liked the scene at the car. She hadn't been able to name what bothered her. The dog was just a dog. Arthur was just tidying. But Eleanor's instincts were the reason she'd survived a life that would have eaten a lesser predator alive, and her instincts were pinging. That night, over the wine, she said the words I'd been dreading since the moment I understood my position depended entirely on staying inside these walls. "I want to get rid of the dog." I was in the hallway, in the shadows, and I went cold. The dog. Gareth, distracted, still rattled about his missing phone. "Why?" "Because it's not normal, Gareth. It stares. It went crazy at Adam's car this morning, his car specifically, out of everything in that driveway. It sits and looks at me like I don't know what it looks like. It looks like it's listening." She swirled her glass. "I got it for optics. The optics are done. The photos for the board are taken. I don't need it anymore, and I don't like the way it watches me in my own house." "Your house," I thought from the shadows. "My house." "But go on." "You're being paranoid," Gareth said. which was extraordinarily funny coming from a man who'd spent the whole day tearing the couch apart looking for a burner phone. Maybe, but we agreed, no loose variables until the estate clears. You said it yourself, 6 days ago. We don't leave anything in the picture that we can't fully explain and fully control. Well, I can't explain the dog, and I can't control the dog. So it goes. Tomorrow, I'll call that place out by the county line, the one that doesn't ask questions, and they'll come take it, and if it never gets adopted, that's not my problem. She said it lightly. She said it the exact way she'd said to Chloe that the watch must be lost somewhere. And I understood, standing in the dark, that the place out by the county line that doesn't ask questions was not a shelter. It was the county's answer for animals nobody claims, and animals nobody claims do not come back. She was going to have me put down. Not out of cruelty even, she wouldn't think of it as cruelty. She'd think of it as tidying. Old habits. She didn't like a messy house. And here is the part I have to be honest about, because I promised myself when I started keeping this ledger that I would tell it straight. For about 10 seconds in that dark hallway, I panicked. Real panic, animal panic, the kind that starts in the body and floods the mind. Because if they took me out of this house, it was over. Everything. I would lose the burner phone hidden under my towel. I would lose my listening post at the exact center of the conspiracy. I would lose my proximity to Chloe, my ability to react, my whole board position, all of it. And I would spend my last 6 days in a concrete cage out by the county line waiting to be tidied, and my cremation would come, and my soul would scatter, and Gareth Stone would wear my watch to my sister's funeral in the spring. 10 seconds. Then I got a hold of myself, because panic is a luxury, and I still couldn't afford luxuries. Think. You are not a dog. You are a man who has been cornered before, cornered by people far more competent than these two. And cornered is just a position, and every position has a move. What's the move? The move, I realized, was that they'd made a mistake by saying it out loud. They always made mistakes by saying it out loud. Eleanor wanted me gone tomorrow, which meant I had tonight. And there is an enormous amount a determined creature can accomplish in a house full of sleeping enemies in a single night, if he stops trying to survive and starts trying to win. If they were going to take away my position, then before they did, I was going to spend my position all the way down to the studs. I was going to take every asset I'd built up, the burner phone, my knowledge of the house, my invisibility, this one last night of access, and I was going to convert all of it into the one thing that would outlast my removal. I was going to make sure that even if I woke up tomorrow in a cage, the machine I'd started would keep running without me. There was a nanny cam. I want to be clear that I did not remember this the way you remember where you left your keys. I remembered it the way a drowning man remembers there's a rope somewhere. 2 years ago, during a brief paranoid phase about the household staff, I'd installed a small motion-activated camera in the living room, tucked into the bookshelf, disguised as a carbon monoxide detector, feeding to a cloud account under an email even Eleanor didn't know I had. I'd forgotten about it. I'd stopped paying attention to it. But I had never taken it down, and I had never canceled the account. And it was still up there on the third shelf of the bookcase, a small dark eye in the exact room where 2 murderers debriefed over wine every single night. And it had almost certainly been recording them, motion activated, this whole time, and neither of them had any idea. The problem was that I had no way to know if it still worked, no way to access the footage, and no way to get that footage to Laura Wells, or Arthur, or anyone with hands. The camera recorded to a cloud I couldn't log into. It was a message in a bottle I couldn't uncork. But Arthur could, if Arthur knew it was there. If I could point Arthur at that bookshelf the way I'd pointed him at the car seat, and I would not get another chance at Arthur, because after tomorrow, I'd be in a cage by the county line. So the plan for my last night in the house wrote itself, cold and clean and desperate. I could not get the footage out, but I could make absolutely certain that the camera was pointed at the right place, recording, and impossible to miss for anyone who went looking. And then I had to survive being taken away long enough for Arthur to come looking, which meant I needed Arthur to have a reason to come back to this house, and I needed to leave him a trail from the driveway to the bookshelf that a careful ex-military man could follow, but 2 arrogant murderers would walk straight past. It was, I'll admit, an insane plan, built on 3 separate long shots stacked on top of each other. But every plan I'd ever made that was worth anything had looked insane the night before it worked. That's the secret nobody tells you about winning from behind. It always looks insane the night before. The difference between a fool and a winner is just which one goes to bed and which one gets up and starts moving furniture in the dark. I got up. I started moving furniture in the dark. 6 days and I was about to lose my seat at the table. So I did what I'd always done when I was about to lose my seat at the table. I turned the table over. The first thing I did that night was reclaim the burner phone from under my towel, because wherever I ended up tomorrow, the phone had to end up with me. A phone I couldn't read was still a phone that, in the right hands, could be broken open, and I was not going to lose it to a county incinerator because I'd been sentimental about my hiding spot. The second thing I did was solve the problem of how to carry a phone out of a house when you have no pockets and no hands and no control over where you're taken. The answer was sitting by the front door, exactly where Arthur had set it. The box of my personal effects. My photographs, my desk things, the stuff Arthur had refused to let get thrown in a dumpster. A cardboard box, folded shut but not sealed, sitting in the front hall. And I knew Eleanor well enough to bet my scattering soul on it, that when the widow performed her generosity, when she handed my grieving sister a little something to keep her from pulling the thread, that box of worthless sentimental junk was exactly the kind of thing she'd press into Chloe's arms. Here, take his photos. He'd want you to have them. And by the way, here's a check. And please don't ask why the physician who signed his death certificate just bought a boat. So I nosed the box open in the dark, and I pushed the burner phone down into the bottom of it, under a framed photo of me and Chloe as kids at the lake, under a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest boss," that Arthur had given me as a joke, down where no one repacking a box of a dead man's things would ever dig. If the box went to Chloe, the phone went to Chloe. And if the box got thrown out, well, then I'd have failed, but I'd have failed swinging, and I'd made my peace with that particular arithmetic a long time ago in a much taller building. The third thing I did took most of the night, and it was the hardest, because it required me to think not like a dog, and not even like a man, but like a director staging a scene he wouldn't be present to watch. The nanny cam. Third shelf of the living room bookcase, disguised as a carbon monoxide detector. A small, dark eye that had, if my 2-year-old paranoia had done its job, been silently recording every debrief these two idiots had held over my wine. I couldn't get the footage out, but footage that no one ever looks for is the same as no footage at all. I needed someone to look. And the only someone who might come back to this house and think to look was Arthur. And Arthur would only come back if he had a reason, and the reason had to be something Eleanor herself would allow. So I built the reason. I went to the box of my effects, and I took out one thing, just one, and I carried it, in my mouth, to the base of the bookcase, and I left it there, on the floor, directly beneath the camera, in plain and deliberate sight. It was a photograph in a small silver frame, me and Arthur, taken 9 years ago on my first day with a driver, both of us squinting into the sun in front of that first ugly leased sedan, and Arthur, I'd forgotten this, the box had reminded me, Arthur was giving the camera a small, reluctant, barely there salute, because I'd made him, because I thought it was funny, because I was young and stupid and did not yet know that this quiet man would end up being the most loyal person in my entire gilded life. I set the photo of Arthur at the foot of the bookcase, under the camera's eye, and I stepped back and I looked at it. And here's the truth. I don't fully know why I did it. Part of it was strategy. If Arthur ever came back into this room, a photo of himself on the floor at the foot of a bookcase would stop him, would make him look up, would put his careful eyes on the shelf where the camera lived. That was the plan I told myself. But part of it, the part I only understood much later, was that I was saying goodbye to my house, and I wanted to leave one true thing in the middle of all the lies. One honest object, placed with intention, in a home that had become a stage set for my murder. A photo of the two men in that whole story who had actually meant it. I left it there like a flag planted on the ground I was about to lose. Then I went back to my box, and I got into it, and I lay down on top of the buried phone and the buried truth, and I watched the numbers in the corner of my vision tick down, and I waited for morning, and for the van, and for whatever came after. 5 days, 19 hours. The van came at 9. But so did Chloe. And this was the piece I could not have planned, the piece that turned the whole day. So did a woman I had never seen before. A woman in a gray blazer with a laminated badge on a lanyard and a leather folio under her arm, who parked a sensible sedan at the curb at 8:55 and rang the bell before either the van or my sister arrived, and introduced herself in a flat, pleasant professional voice as Laura Wells, senior investigator, with the consortium handling the key man policy. Here to ask a few routine questions. So sorry to intrude during such a difficult time. It really is just a formality. May I come in? I did not know then who Laura Wells was. I did not know Arthur had called her, did not know about the diner or the legal pad or the 6 days and no room to be wrong. All I knew was that a stranger with a badge had walked into the house at the exact moment Eleanor was planning to have me quietly killed, and that Eleanor's whole body changed the instant she saw that badge. The widow snapped on like a stage light. Of course, please, come in. Can I get you anything? I'm sorry, it's still so raw, but anything I can do to help? Warm. Bereaved. Cooperative to a fault. And underneath it, wound tight as piano wire. Because a $50 million payout does not send an investigator to your door as a formality. And Eleanor knew it. And Eleanor was now performing the role of grieving innocent widow for a live, professional, skeptical audience in her own living room, 6 feet from the bookcase, 6 feet from the camera. I sat in the corner and I watched Laura Wells's eyes do a thing I recognized because I'd done it my whole career. She was cataloging the room while she made small talk. The wine glasses in the sink, 2, always 2. The man's jacket over the chair, not the dead man's size, quite. The brand new luggage tag on a bag by the stairs, the kind you buy for trips you're about to take. She took it all in behind a pleasant nothing of a face, and she asked her routine questions. When did you notice he was unwell? Who was present? Which physician attended? And Eleanor answered them all, smooth and sad and rehearsed. And it was going fine for Eleanor. It was going perfectly fine. Right up until 2 things happened at once. The doorbell rang again, Chloe arriving for the box, for the little something, red-eyed and clutching a tissue. And the van from the county line pulled into the driveway behind her, and a bored man in coveralls got out with a wire crate and a clipboard and called toward the house. Got a pickup? Animal surrender, address matches, 1 dog? The living room went silent. I watched it land on all of them at different speeds. I watched Chloe, in the doorway, look at the man with the crate, and then at the widow and say, confused, You're getting rid of the dog? I watched Laura Wells's pleasant nothing of a face sharpen by 1 single degree as she filed away a new data point. The grieving widow who adopted a stray for the cameras is disposing of it, quietly, on the same morning an investigator happens to visit. And I watched Eleanor, cornered, on stage, with an heir on one side and an investigator on the other, and a county death van in the driveway. I watched Eleanor do the fastest, cleanest piece of improvisation I have ever seen, and I have sat across the table from professional liars. Oh, no, there's been a mix-up, Eleanor said, and she laughed, light and warm. And she crossed the room and scooped me up, and she held me to her chest exactly the way she had on the first day, and she looked at the man with the crate with an expression of gentle apology. I'm so sorry, you've had a wasted trip. I called about, we've been talking about whether we could keep him, with everything, the house is just so empty and I travel so much, and I thought, but no, we're keeping him. She stroked my head. Her heart was slamming against my side. I could never let this little one go. He was Adam's last gift, in a way. Somebody left him at the gate the day after. It felt like a sign. She was brilliant. I want to be fair to her, because I intend to destroy her, and a man should be honest about the people he destroys. Eleanor was brilliant, and in that one moment, with an audience she couldn't afford to lose, she reversed her entire plan and turned my planned execution into a beautiful little story about a grieving widow too soft-hearted to give up her dead husband's dog. The van left. The investigator wrote something in her folio. It should have been a total loss for me. She was keeping me now, which meant I was staying in the house, which was what I'd wanted all along. So why did I feel the floor tilting? Because Eleanor, having saved the performance, now had to get rid of the audience, and she made, at last, after days of flawless play, a real mistake. A small one, the kind that only matters if someone's counting. Chloe, she said, still holding me, turning to my sister with wet, warm, generous eyes. I'm so glad you're here. There's a box of Adam's things, his photos, his desk bits, silly little treasures. I put it aside specially for you. I know how close you two were. A beat, a catch in the voice, a hand pressed to the heart. And there's an envelope in it, from the estate. From me, really. I know the will was, I know it wasn't what anyone expected, and I don't fully understand it myself. He made those changes so fast at the end, and he didn't explain them to me either. But I couldn't bear for you to walk away with nothing. So please, take the box, take the envelope. Let me do this one thing. And there it was, the check, the blood money. Grief plus guilt plus a check, delivered word for word exactly as she designed it over the wine, so that Chloe would take it and feel dirty and never pull the thread. Except Chloe wasn't looking at the envelope. Chloe was looking at me. Because when Eleanor said, "Take the box," I had started to shake in her arms, deliberately, violently, a puppy in genuine distress, and I had strained toward my sister with everything in my small, strong, maturing body. And I had made a sound I did not know I could make, a high, desperate, keening cry, reaching for Chloe across the room. And Chloe's face had crumpled, and she'd crossed the floor without thinking and taken me out of Eleanor's arms, and the instant I was against my sister's chest, I went still and pressed my face into her neck and stopped shaking. And Chloe let out a wet, broken laugh and said, "Oh, oh, hi, hello, okay, I've got you." "He likes you," Eleanor said, and her voice had changed, just slightly, just enough for me to hear the calculation kick back in under the performance. "Can I?" Chloe looked up, and her eyes were streaming, and she said the words I had been trying to put in her mouth for 5 days from a height of 8 inches off the floor. "Eleanor, would it be okay if I took him? I know you just said you're keeping him, and I know it's a lot to ask, but he reminds me of, I don't even know. I've been so alone since it happened, and the apartment's so quiet, and She buried her face in my fur for a second. "I think I need him more than the check. Honestly. Keep the check. Just, could I have the dog?" And the whole room turned to Eleanor. Laura Wells, investigator, watching. The heir, tear-stained, holding the dog. The widow, who 30 seconds ago had made a beautiful public show of being too soft-hearted to give this animal up. If Eleanor said no, if she clutched the dog she'd just theatrically refused to surrender and denied it to the dead man's weeping sister in front of an insurance investigator already 1 degree too sharp, she would look, in that instant, exactly like what she was. A woman playing a widow. A performance with a crack in it. She had built the cage herself. Optics. Everything for the optics. And now the optics closed around her like a hand, and I watched her understand it. Watched the flash of pure cold fury behind the soft brown eyes, there and gone in half a second. And then Eleanor smiled her most beautiful, most generous, most heartbroken smile, and she said, "Of course you can. Of course. He should be with family. She should be with family." I could have laughed. I could have howled. I was leaving the house of my murderers, riding out the front door in the arms of the one person who had loved me, carrying a buried phone and a buried truth in a cardboard box that a grieving widow was, at this very moment, personally handing to my sister with tears in her eyes, the box, the phone, the will, the whole loaded gun, wrapped in tissue paper and passed across the threshold by the woman it was going to destroy. She thought she was tidying. She thought she was removing a variable and buying off an heir in one graceful stroke. She had no idea she was arming the enemy and delivering the witness to safe harbor and doing it all in front of a professional who was writing down every word. Objective complete. Relocate to safe ground. Witness delivered to the heir. Evidence exfiltrated. The blue light flared, brighter than it had ever been, warm as sunrise, and the words that scrolled across it were different this time. Not instruction, but something almost like respect. You did not escape the trap. You turned it into a door and walked your enemies through it. This is why you were chosen. Reward unlocked. The vessel is now fully matured and bonded to the heir. You are no longer a stray. You are hers, and she is under your protection, and you will find you would tear the world apart before you let them take her too. 5 days, 6 hours remaining. The board is set. Now you stop reacting and start hunting. Chloe carried me out to her little second-hand car and set me on the passenger seat, on top of the box of my own belongings, and she sat behind the wheel for a moment before she started the engine, and she looked at me, this small black and tan creature that had come howling into her arms out of the wreckage of her brother's death, and she reached over and put one hand very gently on my head. "You know what?" she whispered. "I'm gonna call you Adam. Is that weird?" "That's probably weird." He'd have thought it was funny. Her voice cracked straight down the middle. He had the worst sense of humor. I put my paw on her wrist, and I looked up at my sister, and I thought, with everything I had left, "It's not weird, and you have no idea how right you are. Drive, Chloe. Drive us home. We've got 5 days and a war to win, and for the first time since they poisoned me, I've got my family back and my enemies don't know what I know." She started the car, and the witness rode out of the house of the guilty and into the daylight, and behind us, framed in the doorway, a widow watched us go with a smile on her face and ice in her eyes. Already, I would have bet my life on it if I'd had one to bet, already beginning to wonder, in the very back of her brilliant, careful mind, whether she had just made the first mistake of the entire game. She had. She'd made it days ago, actually. She'd made it the moment she looked at a shivering stray at her gate and decided he'd be good for the optics. You should never adopt a witness, and you should really never hand him the evidence on your way out the door. Chloe's apartment was small and warm and full of half-finished paintings, and it smelled like turpentine and old books, and faintly like her, like family. And the moment I walked in on my own 4 paws and she shut the door behind us, I felt something I had not felt since the champagne. Safe. Not victorious, not close to done. Just safe. For an hour, in a room my enemies did not own. I did not have an hour to waste on feeling safe. Chloe set the box of my effects on her kitchen table and stood looking at it for a long time, not opening it, the way you don't open a wound you know is going to bleed. So I made the decision for her. I jumped up onto a chair. The endurance the system had given me made it easy now. My body was growing fast, strong, unnaturally sure, and from the chair onto the table, and I put my nose into that box and I started to dig. Hey, no, buddy, that's... Chloe reached for me, then stopped, because I wasn't chewing, I wasn't playing, I was digging with a terrible focused purpose, throwing tissue paper aside, shoving the world's okayest boss mug out of the way, burrowing down toward the bottom corner where I'd buried it. And Chloe went quiet and watched me the way she'd gone quiet and watched me in the doorway of the house where I died. That same catch in her breath, that same wordless animal recognition she kept almost having and then talking herself out of. I got my teeth on it. I dragged it up out of the box, out from under the framed photo of the 2 of us at the lake, and I dropped it on the table in front of my sister. A slim black phone that was not mine, that she had never seen, that had no business in a box of her dead brother's sentimental junk. Chloe picked it up slowly. This isn't Adam's. She turned it over, pressed the button, the screen lit. Locked. A generic lock screen, a cheap prepaid brick. Why would there be a... And then she went still, because Chloe was not stupid. Chloe was the smartest one in our whole family and always had been. She'd just chosen a quiet life instead of a loud one. And I watched my sister hold a strange burner phone that had been hidden in a box handed to her by her brother's grieving widow. And I watched the first cold question form behind her eyes. Why would a burner phone be hidden in Adam's things? That was the question. That was the thread. And this time, there was no Eleanor in the doorway to snatch it away. Chloe did the thing that saved everything. She didn't call Eleanor to ask about it. Some instinct, grief or suspicion, or the same nameless thing that made her adopt me, told her not to. Instead, she stood in her little kitchen holding the phone, and after a long moment, she pulled out her own phone and made a call. And I heard her say, "Arthur? Hi, it's Chloe, Adam's sister. I'm sorry to call. I got your number from the box you brought. Your note was in it. This is going to sound strange, but something's wrong, and I don't know who else to... Can you come over, please?" She called Arthur. Of course she called Arthur. Of the whole broken world my death had left behind, the 2 people I trusted had found each other across the wreckage without any help from me, drawn together by the same gravity that pulls decent people toward each other when everything's on fire. I sat on the kitchen table next to a burner phone full of murder, and I watched my sister ask my driver for help. And if a dog could weep, I would have flooded that apartment. Arthur came in 40 minutes, and Arthur did not come alone. He came with Laura Wells, and the moment the two of them walked into Chloe's apartment together, I understood that the army I'd felt assembling in the dark was real, that it had been assembling all along in rooms I couldn't see, that Arthur and Wells had spent the last day building the exact case I'd been trying to build from 8 inches off the floor, and that my job now was not to do it alone, but my job was to hand them the pieces and stay alive long enough to see it finished. They sat at Chloe's table. Arthur, huge and quiet in his bad suit. Wells, sharp and gray and precise, her folio open. And Chloe, my Chloe, pale and frightened and brave, holding the burner phone. And me, on the table, in the middle of them, the witness at the center of his own council of war. And none of them, not yet, understanding that the dog was the reason they were all in the room. Wells spoke first, and she did the merciful thing. She laid it all out flat, no softening, because Chloe had earned the truth, and softening it would only make it more dangerous. "Miss Thorne," she said, "I investigate insurance fraud. 9 days ago, your brother died of a sudden cardiac event, and my company was asked to pay $50 million on it. 2 days ago, Arthur brought me a copy of a will, your brother's real will, hidden in his car, that is completely different from the will being read at the estate office in 5 days. The real will leaves you 40% of everything. The one they're about to execute leaves you nothing and hands control of the company to Gareth Stone." She let that sit for 1 second. "I think your brother was murdered, Ms. Thorne. I've thought so since I read his letter. What I haven't had, until maybe right now, is proof. And that phone in your hand might be it." I watched my sister's face as her brother's murder was laid on the table in front of her like an autopsy, and I watched her not fall apart. And I have never been prouder of anyone in my life. She set the burner phone down on the table with a steady hand, and she said, in a voice that only shook a little, "Then open it. Whatever's on it. I want to know." It took Wells's technical contact 90 minutes and a cable and a piece of software I didn't understand, and while we waited, Arthur wandered Chloe's apartment the way soldiers do, checking exits, and I followed him, and when he crouched to scratch my ears, he looked at me for a long moment and said, so quietly the others couldn't hear, "The car seat. The bookcase photo you left. No. You didn't leave a—" He stopped. He shook his head at himself, a big man refusing to believe the obvious thing his own eyes kept telling him. "I'm losing it," he muttered, "talking to a dog." Keep losing it, I thought, and I licked his enormous hand, and I held his gaze 1 beat too long, the way I'd held it in the doorway, and I watched the doubt move across his mountain of a face again, and I thought, "You'll believe it when you have to, Arthur. Not before. That's fine. I don't need you to believe it. I just need you to keep paying the debt." The phone opened, and the room went silent, because the phone was everything. Not a smoking gun, a smoking arsenal. Weeks of messages between Gareth Stone and a contact saved only as M.R., Mateo Delgado, the physician. Arrangements. Payments, $500,000, wired in 3 tranches to an account Wells's eyes lit up at, because she could trace an account. Discussion of the timeline and keeping it clean, and, in one message that made Chloe press her hand to her mouth, a line from Gareth dated the day before the celebration dinner. "Everything's ready for tomorrow. You just sign it the way we discussed. Cardiac. Nothing chemical shows if they don't test for it, and they won't test for it because there's no reason to." And then, more recent, the blackmail. Delgado getting greedy. Delgado wanting $2 million. Gareth going cold. And the last message, sent just 2 days ago, from Gareth to the doctor, that turned Wells's sharp face to stone. "Let's meet in person and settle this like men. I'll bring what you're owed. Friday night. The usual place. Come alone." "Friday," Wells said quietly. "That's in 3 days. He's not going to pay him." She looked up, and for the first time her professional calm had an edge under it. "He's going to kill him. Delgado is the only living human being who can testify that the death was chemical, and Stone just invited him to a private meeting to settle it like men. Stone's cleaning up his last loose end before the estate clears." The last loose end. And I sat on the table and I understood, with the cold clarity that had been my whole gift in life, and apparently in death, that everything had just changed shape. Because if Gareth killed Delgado on Friday, the murder charge died with him. Wells would have motive and money and a suspicious phone, but the one witness who could turn suspicious cardiac event into provable poisoning would be at the bottom of the river, and clever lawyers would spend years turning the rest into reasonable doubt. But if we reached Delgado first, if we got to the frightened, greedy, doomed little doctor before Gareth did, and made him understand that his sworn brother's plan for their meeting like men ended with him dead, then Delgado wouldn't be a loose end anymore. He'd be a witness. Terrified, guilty, facing prison, but alive and talking, which beats loyal and dead in every court there is.
We have to get to Delgado before Friday, Chloe said, following the same road, arriving at the same place.
We have to warn him, turn him. It's not that simple, Wells said. Delgado is a co-conspirator. He murdered your brother for money. If I walk up to him and say, your partner's going to kill you, testify against him, his first move is to call Stone and tell him the investigators onto us, to buy his own safety. We tip the whole thing over. Delgado is only useful if we can catch him at the exact moment he's more afraid of Stone than he is of prison. We need leverage on him, and we need timing. And we need, she rubbed her eyes, and I saw how tired she was, how many hours she'd already spent on this. We need more time than we have. The cremation's the real deadline. Once the body's ashes, even Delgado's testimony is just one criminal's word against a billionaire's. I need the body re-examined first. Physical evidence of the poison. That, plus the phone, plus Delgado, that's a conviction. But the funeral home won't touch the timeline without a court order, and getting an emergency exhumation-style order in 5 days against people with Stone's lawyers is… Her phone rang. She answered it, listened, and I watched Laura Wells, 19 years, no room to be wrong, seen it all. I watched her go pale. Say that again, she said. When did they file the change? A pause. Both of them? Together? A longer pause. She closed her eyes. Okay, thank you. No, thank you for the heads up. She hung up. She set the phone down on Chloe's table very carefully, the way you set down something you want to throw. And she looked around at us, at Arthur, at Chloe, at the dog she still thought was just a dog, and she said the sentence that turned the whole race black. That was my contact at the funeral home. Stone and the widow just moved the cremation up. She swallowed. It's not in 5 days anymore. They pushed it forward. Emergency request, family's wishes, wanting closure, all the right words. Signed by both of them this afternoon. To when? Arthur said, in the flat voice of a man who already knows. Day after tomorrow, Wells said. Thursday. Morning. They cremate the body Thursday morning. Which means whatever I'm going to do about that body, I have… She looked at her watch, and the number she said out loud was the exact same number that flared, that same instant in blue. Light in the corner of my vision, seen only by me. About 40 hours. 40 hours. They'd moved the finish line. My enemies, without ever knowing I existed, had reached out and cut my deadline nearly in half. Not because they'd found me out, but because Gareth Stone had felt watched, had felt that hairline crack running through his perfect plan. And a man who needs to control the story does the same thing every time he feels the story slipping. He rushes to the ending. Burn the body, kill the doctor, close the file. Thursday the body, Friday the doctor, and by the weekend, Gareth Stone sits in my chair, in my tower, wearing my watch, safe forever. 40 hours to re-examine a body 2 murderers were racing to burn. 3 days to reach a doctor 2 murderers were racing to kill. And 1 dog, sitting in the middle of a kitchen table, who was the only one in the room who knew that the clock ticking down toward that Thursday morning cremation wasn't just counting down the evidence. It was counting down me. Because the system had been clear, from the very first night, in words I had not shared and could not share with anyone. When the body burns, the tether severs. When the body burns, the witness scatters. They thought they were destroying the poison in my blood. They had no idea they were also, on the same Thursday morning, at the same appointed hour, burning down the last of Adam Thorne for good. The will, the phone, the case, and the small, stubborn soul that had come back in a stray dog's body to see it through. 40 hours. I stood up on the kitchen table, in the middle of my council of war, and I looked at the 3 good people my death had gathered. My sister, my soldier, my investigator. And I made a sound low in my chest that was not a bark and not a whine, that was, if you'd heard it, almost like a man clearing his throat to speak. They all looked at me, and I thought, with the whole force of everything I had left, wishing with an intensity that bent the air that just once, just this once, they could hear it. 40 hours is enough. I've done more with less. Now listen, because the dog is about to show you exactly where the bodies are buried, starting with mine. I have to stop here and tell you about the other house, the one I'd left.
Because while my council of war sat in a small, warm apartment planning how to save a dead man, the two people who'd killed him were, in their own beautiful cold house, coming quietly apart at the seams, and I only learned the shape of it later, from Wells, from the trial, from the footage. But I want you to see it, because you don't understand a hunt until you've seen it from inside the animal that thinks it's still the hunter. Gareth Stone had not slept well in 6 days. And Gareth Stone was a man who prided himself on sleeping the sleep of the untroubled. It had started with the phone. He would never admit it, not even to Eleanor, but the missing burner had gotten under his skin in a way he couldn't dig out. He'd built his whole life on a simple faith, that he was the smartest man in any room, that he saw the board more completely than anyone else at it, that nothing moved near him that he hadn't already accounted for. And a phone, his phone, the dangerous one, the one that lived in his breast pocket and never left the house, had simply, impossibly, vanished. He'd torn the couch apart. He'd checked the drains. He'd interrogated the cleaner until the poor woman cried. And he'd believed her, which was worse, because if the cleaner didn't take it, then he had no explanation at all, and Gareth Stone could survive anything except having no explanation. "You're obsessing," Eleanor told him, the night after Chloe took the dog, watching him pace the living room for the 100th time. "It's a locked brick. Even if someone has it, they can't open it, and even if they open it, it's a burner. It's not tied to us. Let it go." "I don't like variables I can't see," Gareth said. "You sound paranoid." "I sound careful. There's a difference, and the difference is prison." He stopped pacing and looked at her, and for a moment, the charming, loyal partner mask was entirely gone, and what was underneath was something cold and reptilian and, if she'd been honest with herself, familiar, because it was the same thing that lived under her own face. "That investigator came here, Eleanor, to the house. 50 million doesn't send an investigator to the door as a formality." "And she saw the wine glasses, and she saw my jacket, and she watched you give the sister a dog like she was cataloging every second of it, because she was. Something is wrong. I can feel it. I've felt it since the phone. The phone is a coincidence. There are no coincidences. There are things you see coming and things you don't, and I have spent my entire life making sure I only ever deal with the first kind." He poured a glass of wine. Adam's wine. Always Adam's wine. They were nearly through the good Bordeaux now, drinking a dead man's cellar dry a bottle a night, and he drank half of it in one go, which was not like him. "I want the timeline moved. All of it. The cremation, the doctor, everything. I don't want a clean, respectable mourning period anymore. I want the body burned and the loose ends cut and the estate closed before whatever I can feel out there finishes putting itself together." Eleanor went still. "Moving the cremation up looks strange. Grieving families don't rush to burn. Grieving families do exactly what they want and no one questions it, because questioning a grieving family is cruel, and people would rather be fooled than cruel. We say we want closure. We say the waiting is unbearable. We cry at the funeral director, and he moves us to Thursday and feels good about helping us heal." Gareth set the glass down. "And Delgado, the doctor, moves up too. I'm not waiting until after the estate to deal with him. He's the only living person who can turn sudden cardiac event into homicide, and he's a drunk, and he's greedy, and every night he stays alive is a night he might decide 2 million isn't enough and walk into a police station to sell us for immunity. He goes first. This week. Before the cremation, ideally. A doctor with a gambling problem and a drinking problem has an accident, and no one is surprised, and no one investigates, because who investigates the predictable death of a sad man who was always going to end badly?" He said it the way he said everything, reasonably, warmly, as a series of sensible business decisions. And this exact quality was the thing that had let Gareth Stone murder his best friend and sleep fine for the first 5 nights. To Gareth, there were no crimes. There were only problems and solutions, and the pleasant, competent feeling of matching the right solution to each problem. Adam had become a problem, solved. Delgado was becoming a problem to be solved. The dog had been a small problem, solved, handed off to the sister, gone. Every loose thread a thing to be trimmed. He genuinely could not understand people who agonized over any of it. Agonizing was just poor resource management. What he could not see, what a man like Gareth can never see, because it lives in the one blind spot his kind all share, was that he had made a fatal category error. He thought he was trimming loose threads. He was actually, with every rushed decision, pulling them tighter around his own throat. Moving the cremation up didn't bury the evidence faster. It just gave a tired investigator a suspicious act to point a judge at. Deciding to kill Delgado this week instead of next didn't remove the witness. It just drove a terrified man out into the exact night when the only people who could save him were watching his house. Every move he made to feel more in control was, in fact, the sound of the trap closing, and he mistook the sound for the sound of winning, because he had always mistaken those two sounds for each other, his whole successful, terrible life. Across the room, Eleanor watched him plan a second murder as casually as a third glass of wine, and for the first time, something in her flickered. Not conscience. Let's be honest about Eleanor. I certainly have to be. Not conscience. Eleanor had buried a husband before me and felt nothing, had married me on a stopwatch and cried on command, had held a dying man's dog and called it a sign. Conscience was not in her toolkit. But self-preservation was, sharper in her than in anyone I ever met, and Eleanor's exquisite instincts were, that night, screaming. Because Eleanor had noticed the thing Gareth hadn't. Eleanor had noticed the dog. She couldn't have told you why it bothered her. She'd have laughed at herself if she'd said it aloud. But she kept coming back to it, in the quiet, in the dark. The way the stray had stared at her, from the first day, with those flat black eyes that didn't have the softness a dog's eyes should have. The way it had gone straight to Adam's car, out of everything in the driveway. The way it had sat in the study, at the closet with a false back she didn't even know was false, whining at the one wall in the house that, she'd learned at the trial, hid a safe with the real will in it. The way it had looked at her at the very end when she carried it to the hall and hissed at it to stop, and the way she'd felt, holding it, its small heart slamming against her hand like it knew something, like it was afraid of her the way a person is afraid, not the way an animal is afraid. "I don't know what you are," she'd said to it. She'd meant it as a threat. It had come out, she realized now, in the dark, as a question. And the question would not leave her alone. "Gareth," she said. "The dog." "What about the dog? It's gone. You gave it to the sister." I know I did. I just..." She stopped. She was not a woman who said irrational things out loud. Irrational things were a luxury for people who could afford to be wrong, and Eleanor had never once been able to afford it. But it came out anyway, small and cold. "Doesn't it seem strange to you that it went to Adam's car? That it sat at that closet? That out of every house in the city, someone left a stray at our gate the day after, the exact day after? It's a dog, Eleanor. I know it's a dog. You wanted it for the optics. You got your optics. Now the sister has it, and it's her problem, and it doesn't matter." He looked at her, and something unpleasant crossed his face. "Unless you're telling me you're getting superstitious. Because we cannot afford superstitious. We are 40 hours from having everything, and I need you clear." "I'm clear," Eleanor said. But she wasn't, quite, and she knew she wasn't, and worst of all, she was right not to be. And she would spend the rest of her life knowing that too. That on this one night, 6 days after the champagne, her flawless instincts had told her the exact truth, the impossible truth. That there was something wrong with the dog. That the dog had seen them. That the dog remembered. And that she had let a reasonable man talk her out of the one warning her gut ever gave her that could have saved her. She would lie awake in a cell for years replaying it. I know what you are. The question that was really a question. And the answer, sitting in a warm apartment across the city, learning her whole plan through a wall of 9 days' careless debriefs, patient as a held breath. They went to bed that night in the room that used to be mine, 2 murderers who had almost caught it and let it go. And in the morning, they called the funeral home and moved the fire to Thursday. And Gareth made a call from a payphone. No more burners. He wasn't losing another burner. To two men about a doctor. And both of them felt, doing it, the clean, competent satisfaction of loose ends being trimmed, of control being seized, of the story being brought firmly back under the hand of the smartest man in the room. They had never in their lives been less in control. They had simply, finally, met a player who understood the one thing they didn't, that the board is always bigger than the pieces you can see, and that the deadliest opponent is never the one across the table. It's the one under it, the one you fed, the one you named, the one you were too certain, too clever, too comfortable to fear. I almost feel for them telling it now. Almost. Then I remember the whisper in my ear. Don't fight it, brother. Just go to sleep. And the feeling passes. The way everything about that old, cold life eventually passed. And I get on with the better story, the true one, the one that ends in a warm apartment instead of a tall, cold tower. But you needed to see it. You needed to see them up there in the last house, drinking the dead man's wine, moving the pieces they thought were theirs, feeling like winners right up until the fire, so that you understand what actually happened at that crematorium on Thursday morning. They didn't lose because they were caught. They lost days earlier, in a quiet living room, when a woman's perfect instincts told her the truth, and a clever man taught her to ignore it. Everything after that was just the collapse arriving on schedule. 40 hours split into 2 races, and we ran them both at once. Wells took the first race, the legal one, the paper one, and it was uglier and slower than anyone wanted. Because here's the thing about wealth, the thing I understood better than anyone in that apartment, having spent 15 years buying exactly this kind of protection for myself. Money doesn't just buy you lawyers. Money buys you the benefit of the doubt. Money buys you a funeral director who believes the grieving family over the tired investigator. Money buys you a judge's clerk who can't fit an emergency motion in until next week. Gareth Stone had spent the last 9 days spreading my money around the exact machinery Wells now needed to move, and the machinery moved for him, because it always moves for the man who's already holding the checkbook. But the phone changed the math. The phone the dog had stolen off a jacket in the dark, the phone with $500,000 in traceable transfers and the words, "Nothing chemical shows if they don't test for it." That phone was the thing that let Wells walk into a judge's chambers Wednesday afternoon, not with a hunch and a dead man's paranoid letter, but with a documented financial trail between the acting CEO of a public company and the physician who signed the death certificate. That was no longer a grieving investigator's theory. That was probable cause. And probable cause, even against Stone's money, was enough to get one exhausted judge to sign one emergency order. The cremation of Adam Thorne is stayed, pending forensic examination, effective immediately. Effective immediately. Except nothing legal is ever effective immediately. The order had to be served, on the funeral home, on the family, on the crematorium, and it was Wednesday evening by the time it was signed, and the cremation was Thursday morning. And the gap between a signed order and a served order is exactly the kind of gap a man like Gareth Stone lives inside. Wells sent the order to be served that night, and somewhere across the city, I would learn later, a process server got a flat tire, and a funeral home phone went to voicemail after hours, and the machinery that moved so smoothly for the man with a checkbook developed, for the tired woman with the court order, a sudden and total case of molasses. So the first race was going to come down to the wire, to Thursday morning, to whether a piece of paper could physically reach a crematorium before a body went into the fire. I couldn't do anything about that race. That one belonged to Wells and the process server and the traffic and the gods of bad luck. The second race I could do something about. The second race was Delgado. We went for the doctor Wednesday night, the 3 of us and the dog, because Chloe flatly refused to leave me behind. "He found the phone, Arthur. I'm not leaving him in the apartment. He comes." And because some deep part of Wells, the part that had survived 19 years by trusting instinct over policy, didn't argue. Wells had traced the money to Delgado's real name and, through the name, to an address. A peeling rental house on the wrong side of the river, the kind of place a doctor ends up when the gambling gets ahead of the salary. Which was, Wells explained in the car, almost certainly how Stone had found him in the first place. You don't recruit a happy, solvent physician to falsify a cause of death. You recruit a drowning one.
Stone had a gift for finding drowning men and throwing them an anchor. I sat in Chloe's lap in the passenger seat, and as we crossed the river, I put my nose to the crack in the window, and I did the thing the system had given me, the thing I'd been saving, the thing I wasn't even sure would work. I remembered the smell of my own death. The study, that first day. The sour chemical note under the leather and old paper, the specific signature of the thing that had closed my throat on my own dining room floor. I had caught it once, and thanks to the system, I would never lose it. And now, as we neared the doctor's house, I searched the night air for it, threading through the river stink and the exhaust and the wet spring dark, hunting for one particular thread, because the man who'd handled my poisoning, who'd signed it, who'd been paid to know exactly what it was, that man would carry the ghost of it, on his hands, on his clothes, in the house where he kept his secrets. A scent doesn't lie, and a scent doesn't launder, and I would know Mateo Delgado the instant I smelled him, the way I'd know my own murder, because they were the same smell. We parked down the block. Wells wanted to watch the house first, and she was right to. And it was while we were watching that the dog earned his place in the car. Because I smelled it. Not from the doctor's house, from a car parked across the street from the doctor's house. A car with two men sitting in it, engines off, lights off, patient, the way men sit when they're waiting for someone to come home. And on the night air, faint but unmistakable, threaded out from that parked car, was the sour chemical ghost of the thing that killed me. And something else, something I also knew, because I'd been smelling it for 6 days off a jacket and a wrist and a glass of my wine. Gareth. Gareth's men. Gareth's scent on the men in the car. Gareth hadn't scheduled the doctor for Friday at all. Or he had, and then his hairline crack of paranoia had widened, and he'd moved that up too, the way he'd moved the cremation up, because a man who feels watched rushes to the ending. The men across the street weren't there to escort Delgado to a Friday meeting. They were there tonight. They were waiting for the doctor to come home so they could make this city's very dangerous night 1 degree more dangerous for one drunk physician. And we had driven straight into the middle of it with an art restorer, an insurance investigator, a 51-year-old driver, and a dog. I went rigid in Chloe's lap and I growled, low, real, the first real growl of my second life, staring at the car across the street. And Wells followed my eyes. And Wells had been doing this for 19 years and did not need it spelled out. Down, she said quietly. Everybody down. Arthur, do you see the sedan? 2 up front. I see it, Arthur said, already low, already still, the soldier fully awake in him now. Those aren't cops, and they're not neighbors, Wells said. They're here for Delgado, which means we're too late to be careful and too early to be smart. And if the doctor walks up to that house in the next 10 minutes, we are going to watch a murder. And I am not equipped to stop a murder. I'm equipped to investigate one after the fact. Her voice was flat and fast. We need Delgado to not come home. We need to reach him first, right now, tonight, before he turns onto this street. Call him, Chloe said. You have the number from the phone. If I call him from an unknown number and tell him men are waiting at his house, his first thought is that it's a trap, or that I'm one of Stone's, and he panics and does something that gets him killed or tips Stone off. Wells was already scrolling, already thinking 3 moves ahead, and I loved her for it. She thought like I thought. I need him to trust the call in the first 3 seconds or it's worthless. She stopped. I need something only a friend would know. I don't have that. I don't have anything that makes a scared criminal trust me on the phone at 11 at night. And that was when I understood that this was mine. This was the move only the dog could make. Because I did have something. I had the one thing that would freeze Mateo Delgado in his tracks. The one thing that would make a guilty man believe, in the first 3 seconds, that the person contacting him knew everything. I knew what he'd done, in specific, physical, undeniable detail, in a way no bluffing stranger could fake. And I couldn't say it. But I could show Wells where to point. I jumped out of Chloe's lap onto the dashboard, and I put both paws on the window and I stared down the street, not at the car with Gareth's men, but the other way, up the block, toward the corner, and I barked once, sharp. And Chloe said, "What? What is it?" And I barked again, and I looked back at Wells and then up the block, back at Wells and up the block, the clearest sentence I could write. There. Coming. Now. There's someone coming, Arthur said, low, watching where I watched. A figure had turned the far corner on foot, hunched, unsteady, a man walking home from a bar the way a man walks home from a bar when the bar is the only part of his day he can stand. Even at this distance, even in the dark, the dog knew him. The scent reached me a full 5 seconds before any human could have recognized a thing. The sour chemical ghost of my own murder walking up the sidewalk on 2 legs toward the men who'd come to kill him. And I knew with total certainty. That's him. That's Delgado. That's the man who signed me into a lie, and he's 90 seconds from his own front door and the car full of Gareth's patients, and if he keeps walking, he's dead, and my case dies with him.
That's Delgado, Wells breathed. And she didn't ask how I knew. She'd stopped asking how the dog knew things an hour ago. She just moved. He's on foot. He's ahead of the men. They're watching the house, not the street. Arthur, the far corner. Cut him off before he passes the sedan. Go now. Arthur was out of the car and moving before she finished. 51 years old and built like a retaining wall, and utterly silent, angling up the block to intercept a drunk doctor in the 90 seconds before that doctor walked into his own execution. And I twisted out of the half-open door after him, because there was no universe in which I let this happen without me. And Chloe hissed, Adam. She'd named me Adam. She called me Adam. It still went through me every time. And grabbed for my collar and missed. And then it was me and Arthur in the dark, going to snatch the last witness out of the jaws of the men who'd murdered me. And behind us, Wells was already on the phone to the only number that mattered, her voice low and hard and fast. 911. I need to report an imminent assault in progress. I have eyes on it. I'm a licensed investigator. Reciting an address. Reciting a description of the sedan. Doing the one thing that might put a siren between Gareth's men and their work. And it was all happening at once now. The way the end of a thing always happens all at once, after days of everything happening too slow. Arthur reached Delgado at the corner. I watched him do it. I watched the huge, quiet man step out of the shadow of a hedge directly into the path of the stumbling doctor. And I watched Delgado flinch back with the whole-body terror of a guilty man who has been waiting every night for 9 days for exactly this, for a stranger to step out of the dark and collect the debt. I watched Delgado open his mouth to shout, and a shout would carry. A shout would bring the men from the car. And I did the only thing a 9-pound and growing dog can do to stop a scream. I ran between the doctor's legs, and I pressed my whole body against his shins, and I looked up at him, and Arthur, quick, quiet, caught the doctor's arm before he could bolt, and said the only sentence that could possibly land in the 3 seconds we had. Dr. Delgado, Stone sent 2 men to your house tonight. They're parked across the street right now, waiting for you. We're not with him. We're the only people in this city trying to keep you alive. You can come with us and live, or you can walk another 100 feet and find out I'm telling the truth. You've got about 10 seconds to decide, and if I were you, I'd look at the dog. And Delgado, drunk, terrified, guilty, doomed, looked down at the dog. He looked down at me, and I looked up at him, and I don't know what he saw. I will never know what he saw. But something in the doctor's ruined face changed. Some last taut thread snapped, and he made a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh. The sound of a man who has been carrying a corpse on his back for 9 days and has just been told he can finally put it down. And he whispered, the dog. Oh God. Adam Thorne he was going to get a dog. He told me he talked about it while I was, Delgado swayed, while I was killing him. He talked about the dog he was going to get. And I signed the paper anyway. I did not know that. I had not known that in the last confused hours of my life, drugged and dying and not understanding why, I had talked to the doctor bending over me, a man I thought was helping me, about the dog I'd always meant to adopt and never had. That my last human conversation had been with my own murderer, about the one small ordinary happiness I'd kept putting off, the happiness I deferred the way I deferred everything that wasn't the tower and the deal and the win. I'd told the man killing me that someday I'd get a dog. And then I died, and some day had come, and here I was, the dog, pressed against the shins of the man who'd killed me, looking up at him, keeping him alive. I don't believe in signs. I built everything I ever had by refusing to believe in signs. But I stood on that dark corner, and I watched the last thread of Mateo Delgado's resistance dissolve at the sight of a dog he had no way of recognizing, and I thought, all right,
Maybe one sign. Maybe just this once. Come with us, Arthur said again, gently now, the way he'd once left Soup on a car seat. Come on, before they see you. And the doctor came. We got him into the car, Wells already pulling away from the curb, smooth and unhurried, just another set of headlights in the night, as behind us a police cruiser turned onto the doctor's street with its lights coming on, and the sedan with Gareth's two men did the mathematics of that and decided, wisely, that tonight the drunk doctor had gotten lucky and pulled out the other way. We drove Mateo Delgado across the river with his face in his hands, shaking, whispering apologies to no one, to everyone, to me, and Wells let him shake for exactly 6 blocks before she said, in the flat, kind voice of a woman who has turned 100 frightened men into 100 useful witnesses, "Doctor, in about 36 hours, Gareth Stone is going to have that body cremated, and once it's ash, you're the only physical evidence left that Adam Thorne was poisoned. Stone knows that. That's why there were men at your house. You are, as of right now, a dead man walking, and the only thing standing between you and the river is that we got to you first. So here's your one offer, and it doesn't come twice. You testify. You tell the truth about what Stone and the widow paid you to do, and how, and with what. And in exchange, you're not a murderer who dies in an alley. You're a witness who lives. That's the whole deal. That's the only deal. Take it, or I put you out at the next corner, and you can go home to your friends in the sedan." Delgado was quiet for a long time. The river slid by. And then he said the words that turned my death from a suspicious cardiac event into a case that could hang 2 people. The words I had been fighting for from 8 inches off the floor for 6 days. I kept the sample. Wells's hands went still on the wheel. I kept a sample, Delgado said again, dead and flat, staring at nothing. The toxin from him, from the body. Before I signed it. I kept a sealed sample and the real assay, the honest one, the one that shows exactly what it was, because I'm not a... His voice broke. I'm not a complete fool. I knew what Stone was. I knew a man who'd do this to his best friend would do it to me the second I stopped being useful, so I kept insurance. A sample and a paper, hidden. Somewhere they'll never find it, and somewhere I can reach it. He laughed, that same wet, broken laugh. I've been carrying the proof of my own crime around for 9 days because it was the only thing keeping me alive. And it didn't even work. They came anyway. Where is it? Wells said, very softly. And Mateo Delgado, murderer, blackmailer, coward, dead man reprieved, looked up and looked, of all of us, of everyone in that car. He looked at the dog in Chloe's lap, as if I were the one he owed the answer to. As if some part of his ruined conscience had decided that the small black creature that appeared at his feet at the worst moment of his life was owed the truth first. Somewhere safe, he said to me. I'll take you there tomorrow, I promise. I'll take you there. The physical evidence, independent of the body. Proof of the poison that would survive the fire. The one thing that meant even if the cremation happened, even if the process server's flat tire and the funeral home's voicemail and Gareth Stone's checkbook all conspired and my body went into the flames Thursday morning, the case would live. The case would live. The dog might not. That part I kept to myself because there was no way to share it and no point in the sharing. The system's words had never changed. When the body burns, the tether severs. Delgado's sample could save the case. It could not save me. Only stopping the fire could do that. And stopping the fire was Wells's molasses-slow race with a court order and a flat tire. And that race, I could not run. But I looked at the doctor promising the dog he'd deliver the evidence, and I looked at my sister holding me, and my driver in the front seat, and the investigator who thought like I thought, and I found that I did not feel afraid. I felt the way I'd felt the night I hid the first stolen phone under my towel, cold and clean and certain. Because whatever happened to me on Thursday morning, whether the paper reached the fire in time or didn't, whether Adam Thorne got to keep the small, stubborn soul that had come back to finish this, or scattered on the wind over a crematorium, the machine was built now. The witnesses were gathered. The evidence was coming out of the dark. I had turned the table all the way over, and my enemies still didn't even know there'd been a second player at the board. They'd wake up Thursday thinking they'd won, thinking they were burning the last of the evidence, thinking they were closing the file. They had no idea they were about to lose everything, and they had no idea it had all started the day a grieving widow looked at a shivering stray at her gate and decided he'd be good for. The optics. 36 hours. Let's finish it. Thursday came gray and cold, and the fire was scheduled for 8. We did not sleep. Delgado had given us the sample's location, a rented storage unit across town. The assay and the sealed sample zipped into the lining of a cheap suitcase. But the storage facility didn't open its gates until 9, and the body burned at 8, and so we had to split the impossible in 2. Wells went for the paper. She'd chase the court order, chase the process server, chase the served copy that would legally freeze the crematorium, and pray it moved faster this morning than it had last night. And the rest of us, me, Chloe, Arthur, and the shaking doctor who'd decided that if he was going to die, he'd rather die on the right side of it for once, the rest of us went for the fire itself. To buy time. To stand between my body and the flames with nothing but our bodies and our voices until a piece of paper could catch up. I want to tell you I was calm. I'd been calm for 6 days, cold and clean and certain, the way I'd been calm in every boardroom that ever tried to break me. But as Chloe's little car crossed the city toward the crematorium in the gray dawn, with the number in the corner of my vision sliding down past 2 hours, past 90 minutes, I felt the calm start to thin. Because for the first time, the thing racing the clock wasn't the case. It was me. I could feel it. That's the part I never told them, the part I couldn't. As Thursday morning tightened, I could feel the tether the system had spoken of. Feel it the way you feel a held breath, a pull, low and constant, drawing at the edges of whatever I was. Every mile closer to 8 o'clock, the pull got stronger. My paws felt less certain on the seat. The colors of the world went, very slightly, thin. Adam Thorne was a soul borrowed against a body that was scheduled to burn, and the closer that body got to the fire, the more of me started to come loose, like a name written in sand at the edge of the tide. If the fire took the body, it took me. I'd known that since the first night. But knowing a thing and feeling it come for you are different animals, and on Thursday morning I felt it come for me. And I discovered that even a man who has already died once can be afraid of dying twice. Chloe, driving, glanced over. "You okay, buddy? You're shaking." She put her hand on me at a red light, and her touch steadied the thinning colors, just a little, just enough. Hey, we're gonna stop it, okay? We're gonna stop it." She didn't know what she was promising. She thought she was comforting a nervous dog. She was, without knowing it, talking her own brother back from the edge of the tide. And it worked. It actually worked. Her hand on my head held me in the world 1 more mile. "Stay," I told myself, in her voice, in Arthur's, in the memory of a thermos of ginger soup. "Stay. You don't get to scatter yet. Not before you've finished. You have never once left a deal on the table, and you are not going to start by leaving this one." The crematorium was a low brick building behind the funeral home, tasteful, quiet, a tall, clean chimney against the gray sky, and there were 2 cars already in the small lot when we pulled in, and I knew both of them by scent before Chloe had parked. Eleanor's silver Bentley and the black sedan from the doctor's street. They'd come to watch. Of course they had. Of course Gareth Stone and Eleanor had come, at 8 in the morning, to a crematorium, to stand in a viewing room and watch the last physical evidence of their crime turn to ash. Because a man like Gareth does not trust a job to be done unless he sees it done. And because a woman like Eleanor likes to close her own loops. And because, I understood this, standing on the seat with the world going thin around me, because to them, this was the finish line. This was the moment the story ended and the winning began. They'd rushed everything to reach this exact 8 o'clock, and they'd dressed for it, and they'd come to witness it, the way you come to witness the closing of a deal you've worked very hard to close. They had no idea they'd come to witness the opposite. "They're here," Arthur said, low, reading the same 2 cars. "Both of them. And Stone's men." "Then we don't go in quiet," Chloe said, and I looked at my sister and saw something in her face I hadn't seen before, something that had been growing under the grief all week and had just now finished growing. Fury. Cold, clean, righteous fury. The family fury. The thing that had let me take companies apart, and it was in her now, and it was beautiful. They came to watch him burn, Arthur. They killed him, and now they came to watch the proof burn with their own eyes and then go split up his life. We are not going to be quiet. She turned off the engine. How long does Wells need? She doesn't know, Arthur said. The order's signed. Getting it served and getting the crematorium to honor it could be 20 minutes, could be an hour. We have to hold the room. Then we hold the room, Chloe said. And we went in to hold the room. The viewing area was small and hushed and horrible in its tastefulness. Soft carpet and soft lighting and a wall of glass. And beyond the glass, the committal chamber. And in the committal chamber, on a steel cradle before the closed doors of the retort, was a plain coffin. And inside the plain coffin was me, my old body. The face I'd worn for 34 years, that I'd shaved every morning, that Arthur had watched in the rearview mirror for 9 years, that my sister had loved her whole life. I was in that box, and I was also on this side of the glass, on 4 legs, and the pull of the tether between the two of me was so strong now that I nearly went to my knees on the soft carpet, the world thinning and graying at the edges, 8 o'clock bearing down like a train. And standing at the glass, watching the coffin, dressed in beautiful black, were my wife and my brother. Eleanor turned when we came in, and her face did a remarkable thing. It cycled, in under a second, through surprise, calculation, and the smooth, warm mask of grief, landing on the mask, always on the mask. Chloe? Oh, sweetheart, I didn't think you'd want to be here for this part. It's so hard. It's just family, and I didn't want to put you through. Stop the cremation, Chloe said. The room went very still. I'm sorry? Eleanor said. Stop it, right now. This body is evidence in a murder investigation, and there is a court order coming to freeze it, and if you burn it in the next hour, you are destroying evidence, and I have witnesses, and I have his real will, and I have the phone. Chloe's voice did not shake. My sister, the quiet one, the one who'd chosen paint over power, stood in a crematorium and faced down the 2 people who'd murdered her brother, and her voice did not shake. So stop it, or explain to me, in front of these people, why you're in such a hurry to burn him. Gareth Stone turned around slowly. And here's the thing I will remember, if I remember anything, when whatever's left of me finally does scatter on some far tide. I watched Gareth Stone's face when he understood that the game had a second player. I watched the man who needed, above all things in this world, to be the smartest man in the room, the man in control of the story, the man who saw every move before it was made. I watched him look at a grieving art restorer and hear the words, "The phone and the real will." And I watched the exact instant the ground went out from under him, the instant he realized that somewhere, somehow, for days, something had been moving against him that he had never seen, never counted, never even suspected, and that it had reached all the way into his own house and taken the burner phone off his own jacket, and he had torn the couch apart looking for it and blamed a cleaner, and that whatever it was. Here now, at the finish line, holding pieces of his crime he'd been certain were buried forever. I watched Gareth Stone feel watched, at last, completely, and I watched it break something behind his eyes. I don't know what she's talking about, he said, and his voice was steady. He was good. He was so good. But I could smell it on him now, the change, the sour flood of a cornered animal under the cologne. Eleanor, the poor girl's grieving, she's not... He turned to the funeral director hovering by the wall, pale and alarmed. Proceed. My partner's family is understandably emotional, but this is a private committal and we'll proceed as scheduled. Now, please. You will not proceed, said a new voice, and it was Delgado. The doctor stepped out from behind Arthur, where he'd been hovering, gray and swaying, and Gareth Stone's careful face finally, fully cracked, because there is no bluff left when the man you sent 2 employees to kill last night walks into the room on the arm of your victim's sister. Mateo, Gareth said softly. It was not a greeting. It was a threat with a name attached. They came to my house last night, Gareth, Delgado said, and he was crying, the ruined weeping of a man saying a true thing for the first time in years. Your men, to my house. After everything I did for you, after I signed my own soul away for you, you sent men to my house. So no, I'm not going to stand here and watch you burn him and then wait for my turn in the river. I kept a sample, do you understand? I kept a sample and the real assay, and I am going to hand it to that woman with the court order, and I am going to tell them everything, every dollar, every text, the champagne, the celebration dinner, all of it, because you were going to kill me. You were always going to kill me, and I would rather go to prison than into your river." It all happened at once after that, the way the end of a thing always does. Gareth moved toward the funeral director. "Proceed, now, do it now, burn it." And Arthur stepped into his path, a wall of a man, and did not touch him, just stood there, immovable, and said, "You don't want to put your hands on me, son." And Eleanor, the mask finally gone, the soft brown eyes gone flat and reptilian, hissed at Chloe, "You have no idea what you're doing, you stupid little girl. You're going to lose everything and get nothing." And Chloe said, "I already lost everything. He was everything. You took him." And the funeral director was stammering that perhaps they should pause, perhaps they should wait, and Gareth was shouting at him to proceed, and the two men from the sedan appeared in the doorway, and the room tipped toward violence. And I felt 8 o'clock arrive. I felt it like a wave, the tether snapping taut, the world going white at the edges, and beyond the glass, I saw the funeral director's terrified assistant, confused, following the shouted instruction of the important man with the checkbook, doing what he was told the way the whole machine had done what Gareth told it all week. I saw the assistant reach for the control that would open the doors of the retort and send the cradle forward, and I felt myself beginning to come apart, to thin, to scatter. Adam Thorne dissolving at the edges like a name in wet sand. And I understood that the paper was not going to make it, that Wells's molasses race had lost, that in about 4 seconds, my body was going into the fire and I was going with it. So I did the last thing I had, the only thing left. I stopped being careful, and I stopped being a witness, and I stopped trying to lead the humans to the truth from 8 inches off the floor, and I simply, finally, threw my whole self at the fire, because that is what I have always done when the deal is about to close against me. I put my own body on the table. I ran at the glass. I ran at the committal chamber, and there was a door in the glass wall, propped, an attendance door, and I went through it low and fast, faster than a dog my age should move, the system's endurance burning through me all at once. All of it, everything I had left, and I was into the committal chamber, into the cold and the machine hum and the terrible closeness of my own coffin, and the assistant's hand was on the control, and the doors of the retort were grinding open, orange lights spilling out, heat rolling across the room, and I did the only thing a 9-pound and growing creature can do against an industrial furnace and a man following orders. I put myself between the fire and the box. I planted my paws on the cold steel of the cradle, in front of my own coffin, facing the open mouth of the retort and the heat pouring out of it, and I braced there, and I looked back through the glass at my sister, at my driver, at the doctor, at the 2 people who'd murdered me, and I made the sound. The one I'd been trying to make all week. Not a bark, not a whine. The sound a man makes when he has one thing left to say and no voice to say it. And it came out of my small chest and filled that cold room. And beyond the glass, everyone froze. And Eleanor, of all of them, Eleanor, who had held me on the first day and felt my heart slam against her side and said, "I don't know what you are." Eleanor looked at the dog braced in front of Adam Thorne's coffin, refusing to move, facing down the fire, making that sound. And I watched the color drain entirely out of my wife's beautiful face, and I watched her mouth shape a word without breath behind it. And the word was, Adam? The world had gone almost entirely white. I could feel the last of me lifting, thinning, the tether stretched to its final thread, the heat of the retort on my face, and I held the cradle, and I held her eyes through the glass, and I gave her the answer with the whole of my dissolving self, the answer she would never be sure of, the answer that would haunt whatever was left of her life. Yes, it's me. It was always me. You adopted the man you murdered, and you handed him the evidence, and you brought him here to watch you fail, and the last thing you'll ever be certain of is the least certain thing of all. And then, over the machine hum and the roar of the flame and the frozen silence, from the doorway of the viewing room, a 4th voice, hard, breathless, absolute, cut through everything. "Stop. Court order. Nobody touches that body." Laura Wells stood in the doorway with a served, stamped, signed injunction in her raised hand and 2 uniformed police officers behind her, and she had made it. She had won her molasses race by 4 seconds. She had run through the last of the machinery that money built and come out the other side with the one piece of paper that could freeze the fire. And the assistant's hand jerked off the control, and the grinding doors of the retort shuddered and reversed, and the orange light narrowed and died, and the heat rolled back, and the cradle stopped. The fire did not take the body. The tether did not sever. The white at the edges of the world pulled back, slowly, like a tide deciding just this once to turn early. And the colors came back into things. And I was still there, braced on the cold steel in front of my own coffin, shaking, whole, still Adam, still here. And through the glass, my sister had both hands pressed over her mouth and tears pouring down her face. And Arthur had bowed his head. And Mateo Delgado had sunk to his knees, and 2 police officers were reading Gareth Stone his rights while he stood rigid and gray and finally, completely silent. The smartest man in the room, out of moves, out of story, watching the file he'd come to close crack open in front of the entire world. And Eleanor stood alone at the glass, staring at the dog in the committal chamber, her hand against the pane, whispering a word she would spend the rest of her life unable to prove and unable to forget. 8:04 in the morning. I had beaten the fire by 4 minutes and 4 seconds. The body was preserved. The sample was real and coming. The phone was in evidence. The doctor was talking. The will was found. The witnesses were gathered. And the 2 people who'd poisoned a man over a celebration dinner and toasted his death and split his life while his body was still warm had been arrested in a crematorium, in front of the very fire they'd rushed across a week to light, by a court order carried through the door at the last possible second by an investigator a driver had called because a dog led him to a car seat. I stepped down off the cradle. My legs held. The world was solid again. Round, I thought, and found I'd lost count. And found I didn't care. The last round, and it was mine. The sample was real. That mattered more than anything else that happened that whole strange week, and I need to tell it before I tell the rest, because a case is not built on drama. It is built on the one physical fact that no lawyer can talk away, and the sample was the fact. We went for it Thursday afternoon, after the crematorium, after the arrests, after Chloe and I sat in her car in the parking lot and shook for 20 minutes with a relief too big to hold. Delgado, now formally a cooperating witness with a lawyer of his own and a squad car parked outside wherever he slept, took Wells and 2 detectives to the storage facility across town, to the rented unit, to the cheap suitcase with the false lining. And there it was. Exactly where a frightened doctor had hidden the proof of his own crime because it was the only leash he had on the man who owned him. A sealed forensic sample of the toxin that had closed my throat over a plate of celebration dinner. And beside it, the real assay, the honest one, the analysis Delgado had run in secret and never signed, the one that named the poison and the dose and the fact, undeniable, unchemical heart attack, black and white on a page, that Adam Thorne had been murdered. Wells told Chloe later that when the lab confirmed it, when the sealed sample matched the tissue they'd preserved off the body they'd saved from the fire by 4 minutes, she'd sat in her car and put her head on the steering wheel. Because in 19 years of watching rich people murder each other and dress it up as bad luck, she had almost never gotten to hold, in her own 2 hands, the thing itself. The proof. Not motive, not opportunity, not a suspicious pattern a good lawyer bends into fog. The actual poison, the actual number, the actual truth, sealed in glass, waiting 9 days in a false-bottomed suitcase because a coward had been just brave enough, or just self-interested enough, to keep it. I was in the car for that part too, on Chloe's lap, and I remember, while I still remembered anything as a man, thinking that it was the single most important object in the entire story. More than the will, more than the phone, more than the footage. Because the will proved they were thieves, and the footage proved they were monsters, but the sample proved they were murderers, and it would have proved it even if the fire had taken my body and scattered my borrowed soul on the Thursday morning wind. The case would have lived without me. That was the thing that let me make my peace with the whole gamble, back before I knew I'd get to keep even the dog's small life. Whatever happened to me, the truth was already out of the dark and sealed in glass and impossible to burn. A coward's insurance policy, kept out of pure self-preservation by a man with no honor left, became the keystone that convicted the 2 people who'd murdered me. There's a lesson in that somewhere about how justice actually gets done in this world, not by heroes usually, but by frightened, compromised, self-interested people doing one halfway decent thing for entirely selfish reasons at exactly the right moment. I'll take it. After the week I'd had, I'd learn to take my miracles in whatever grubby shape they arrived, on 2 legs or 4. Here's the thing I learned, watching my own murder get solved from a height of 8 inches off the floor. The powerful never fall all at once. They fall the way a great building falls, slowly at first, one support giving, then another, and then all at once and completely. And the loudest sound in the whole collapse is the sound of the people inside it turning on each other. Gareth and Eleanor turned on each other before the police cars had even left the crematorium. It started in separate rooms at the precinct, which is where it always starts, because the very first thing a good detective does with 2 conspirators is put them in separate rooms and let each one imagine what the other is saying. And Gareth Stone and Eleanor Thorne, who had murdered a man together and toasted it together and planned a second murder together over my wine, discovered, the instant they were apart, the instant the shared story wasn't there to hold them, that neither of them had ever, for 1 single second, been loyal to the other. They'd been loyal to the money. And the money was gone now, frozen, evidence, and when the money goes, people like that have nothing left to be loyal to at all. Gareth went first, because Gareth needed to be the smartest man in the room, even when the room was an interrogation cell. And the smartest man move, he decided, was to get ahead of it. It was her idea, he told them. Eleanor's. She married him for it. She was placed in his path years ago. She's a professional. Check her history. The fated shipping family is a fiction. She's done this before. Find the husband before me. I bet there's a husband before me. I was weak. I was in love with her. She used me. She planned everything. He actually said that. The man who whispered, "Don't fight it, brother," into my dying ear. He sat in a cell and said she used me, and somewhere in whatever's left of the universe, I hope I was allowed to laugh. And Eleanor, in her separate room, did the same thing in the opposite direction, colder and cleaner because she was better at it. It was Gareth. He came to me. He'd been planning it for years. He was jealous of Adam his whole life. He resented living in his shadow, being the second name on the charter, the charity case who got taken in. He forged the will. I didn't even understand the documents. I signed what he told me to sign. He found the doctor. He arranged the poison. I was grieving my husband and this man manipulated me. She wept when she said it, real tears, on command. The same tears that had once made a lonely rich man buy her a coat. And for about 10 minutes, I imagine she almost believed it herself. They each handed the prosecutors the other one, gift-wrapped, and in doing so, they each confirmed the whole thing, because the fastest way to prove a conspiracy is to get both conspirators to describe it in detail while blaming their partner. Wells told Chloe, later, that in 19 years she'd rarely seen a case build itself so fast. They did 90% of my job for me, she said. All I had to do was hold the recorder and let them race to sell each other out. But the 90% that convicted them beyond any lawyer's reach, the piece that turned 2 conspirators blaming each other into an airtight, unassailable, historic case, that piece came out of a bookcase. The police searched the house the day after the arrest, with a warrant, thoroughly, and a young officer cataloging the living room noticed something odd. A framed photograph of the deceased and his driver sitting on the floor at the foot of a bookcase, propped against the base as if someone had placed it there deliberately, facing up. It was strange enough that she mentioned it. And because she mentioned it, and because a good detective pulls every thread, someone looked up from the photo to the shelf above it and noticed the carbon monoxide detector on the 3rd shelf that wasn't wired to anything, and took it down, and turned it over and found the small dark lens and the micro SD slot. The nanny cam. 2 years of my forgotten paranoia. Motion activated, recording to a card and to a cloud account under an email even Eleanor never knew existed. It had been recording them the whole time. Every debrief, every glass of my wine, every quiet, arrogant, murderous conversation these 2 had held in the safety of a house they believed was empty. The night they discussed offering Chloe a check to keep her from pulling the thread, recorded. The night Gareth said this city's very dangerous for doctors who drink, and Eleanor laughed and said, "God, I love how your mind works." Recorded. In high definition, with sound, time-stamped. 2 faces perfectly lit, saying the quiet parts out loud because to them, the room was empty. The room was never empty. There was a camera on the 3rd shelf, and on the floor beneath it, for the last 4 days, there had been a photograph placed with intention by a creature they'd stopped counting. Placed there, though the police would never understand this, and neither would anyone else, by the one witness who knew the camera existed and could not tell a soul, and so left a photo at its feet like an arrow. like a flag, like a message in a bottle addressed to whoever finally came looking. When Wells told Chloe about the footage, when she explained that the confessions had been captured, all of them, in the murderer's own words, in the murdered man's own living room, Chloe was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked down at me, lying at her feet, and she said something that stopped my small heart. "Arthur said you left a photo of him on the floor by the bookcase," she said slowly, "before we took you out of that house. He told me, and I didn't. I thought he was just tired. He kept saying the dog left it there. The dog moved a framed photo across a room and set it up at the foot of the exact bookcase where the camera was." She crouched down. She looked into my eyes, the way she'd looked into them in the doorway on the first day, the way Eleanor had looked into them at the glass, that same nameless recognition, closer now, so close. "How did you know it was there, buddy?" she whispered. "How could you possibly have known?" I looked back at my sister, and I did not have a hand to salute her with, and I did not have a voice to answer her with, and so I did the only thing I could. I got up, and I walked to the box of my effects that still sat in the corner of her apartment, and I nosed out the framed photo of the two of us as children at the lake, and I carried it to her, and I set it in her lap, and I put my paw on it, and I looked up at her. Chloe started to cry. She didn't understand it, not really, not in words she'd ever be able to say out loud without sounding mad. But some deep, wordless, family part of her understood something, and she gathered me up against her chest and buried her face in my fur and cried the way she'd cried in the driveway on the first day. Except this time it was different. This time, under the grief, there was something almost like wonder, and she whispered into my ear, so quietly I don't think she even knew she said it out loud. "It's you, isn't it? Somehow, it's you." I couldn't say yes, but I didn't have to. I leaned into her and I let her hold me, and for the first time since the champagne, I let myself simply be held by the one person who had loved me before I had a single dollar to my name and would have loved me after they were all gone. And that was answer enough for both of us. The will was read 6 days later in the same lawyer's office where they'd planned to read the forged one, and it was not the quiet transfer of a stolen empire. It was a public reckoning, because by then it was everywhere. The story had broken the way only the fall of the powerful breaks. CEO of Thorne Industries murdered by business partner and wife, poisoning, forged will, arrest at crematorium, dramatic last-second court order. The board that had been so ready to eat up the grieving widow optics was now falling over itself to distance from Gareth Stone. The offshore accounts he'd bragged about, the $400 million he'd been so certain was as good as his, all of it frozen, all of it evidence. And the real will, my real will, the one I'd sealed in a safe behind a false wall on a bad, frightened night 18 months before I died, the one Arthur had carried out of the house in his jacket pocket, the real will was entered into probate, authenticated, and read aloud. 40% to my sister, Chloe Thorne. 3 independent directors named to keep the company honest, to keep any one person from ever controlling it alone. The exact safeguard I'd built specifically, though I hadn't known it at the time, to stop the exact thing Gareth tried to do. And the letter. The lawyer read the letter, the one that began, "If you're reading this, then I was right to be afraid," and read it to the end, to the part I'd written on that bad night and never expected anyone to see. The part that said, "To my sister Chloe, if it comes to this, you were the only one who ever loved the man and not the money. Everything I built trying to be worth the family we came from. You already were, without building anything. Take care of it better than I did, and forgive me for all the years I let them keep us apart." I knew. Some part of me always knew. Chloe sat in that office and heard her dead brother apologize to her from 18 months in the past, and she did not fall apart, because she was the strong one. She was always the strong one, and when the lawyer finished, she simply reached down and put her hand on the dog sitting at her feet, and she left it there, and she did not let go for the rest of the reading. They gave her the watch back that same week. It had been taken from Gareth's wrist when they arrested him. My Patek, my mother's 2 years of saving, the one honest thing in all my gold, logged into evidence, and once its provenance was established, it was released to my next of kin, which was now, legally and truly, Chloe. She didn't know what it meant. She knew it had been our mother's, that our mother had given it to me, that I'd never taken it off. She didn't know I'd noticed it on Gareth's wrist on the second morning and made a cold, specific note in a ledger behind my eyes. When this is over, I want the watch back. She brought it home in a small velvet box, and she sat on the floor of her apartment with it, turning it over in her hands, and I came and sat beside her, and she looked at the watch and then at me, and something occurred to her, some impulse she couldn't have explained, and she took the watch out of the box and she held it down, low, at my level, so I could see it, so I could smell it. My mother, faint and gone and 18 years dead, and me, and even a ghost of Gareth, all layered in the metal, a whole history of love and theft in a thing that told the time. He'd want it kept in the family, Chloe said softly, echoing the words she'd said to Eleanor on the first day, the words Eleanor had answered with a lie. You should, I don't know why I want you to see it. She laughed at herself, wet and quiet. You're a dog. I leaned forward and I pressed my nose to the watch, to the cool, familiar metal, to my mother and my past, and the last thing they stole from me and the last thing I got back. And I held it there for a long moment, and then I looked up at my sister, and I understood that I had, in fact, gotten everything on the ledger back. The phone, the will, the truth, the watch, my sister, my name in her mouth every time she called me across the apartment. Everything except the one thing no ledger could return, the thing I'd traded for all the rest without knowing the price until it was paid. My hands, my voice, my place at the table as a man. But I found, sitting on the floor with my mother's watch under my nose and my sister's hand on my back, that I did not want it back as badly as I'd have guessed. That is the strangest thing I have to tell you, and the truest. I had spent my whole life at the table, playing every round, winning everything, deferring every small happiness until the empire was finished. And the empire was never finished. And then I died at my own celebration dinner, surrounded by people who were only there for the winnings. And now I sat on a paint-stained floor in a small, warm apartment with the one person who'd never wanted a thing from me but my company. And I was a dog. And I had nothing. And I was, for the first time in either of my lives, completely at peace. Objective complete, the blue light said. Gentle now, unhurried, the urgency gone out of it entirely. The murderers are delivered to justice. The stolen inheritance is restored. The innocent are protected. The unjust death is answered. Primary directive fulfilled. And then, after a pause, more words, softer than any the system had shown me before. You have a choice to make, Adam Thorne, but not tonight. Tonight, be held. You have earned one night of being held. So I was. I lay in my sister's lap with my mother's watch beside us and the city quiet outside. And Chloe stroked my head, and neither of us said anything, because one of us couldn't, and the other one didn't need to. And the ledger behind my eyes was finally, after 34 years and one strange borrowed week, completely, perfectly closed. The choice came a week later, on a quiet night, after Chloe had fallen asleep on the couch with a book on her chest and one hand hanging down to rest on my back. The blue light bloomed in the dark, softer than I'd ever seen it, and the system spoke to me for what I somehow knew would be the last time. Your work is done, Adam Thorne. The tether that bound you to this world was justice unfinished. It is finished now. And so, by the oldest rule there is, you are free to go. You may move on. Lay down the weight of what you were, and pass into whatever waits past the edge of the tide. It is peace. It is rest. It is the thing every soul is owed at the end, and you have earned it twice over. Or you may be born again. A new life, a new name, a new city, a full human span with hands and a voice and every table you could ever want to sit at. You would remember none of this. Adam Thorne would end, cleanly, and someone else would begin. And that someone would get the one thing you never had. A life not spent proving he deserved to be alive. I lay very still in the dark with my sister's hand on my back, and I considered it. A voice, hands, a new life at a fresh table, all the rounds still to play. It was, by any accounting I'd ever done, the correct move. It was the winning move. Everything I'd spent 34 years wanting offered clean. Or, the system said, and there was something in the words now that was almost gentle, almost sorry, you may stay. You may remain in this vessel and live out its ordinary life. But understand the cost, because I will not let you choose it blind. This body is a dog, and it was only ever loaned your mind for the length of the task. If you stay, the man will fade. Not all at once, slowly, kindly, over the coming months, Adam Thorne will thin out of these bones like a name washing off a stone. The ledger will go. The boardrooms will go. The words will go. In a year, you will not remember the champagne, or the tower, or the whisper in your ear. You will not remember that you were ever a man at all. You will only remember that you love her. That much stays. The love is the one thing the vessel can hold on its own. Everything else that made you Adam Thorne will dissolve, and what will be left is a dog who loves a woman named Chloe with his whole simple heart and does not know why, and cannot say why, and does not need to. That is the price of staying. You keep the love, and you lose the man. Choose. I lay in the dark and I listened to my sister breathe, and I thought about the tower, and the deals, and the 15 years of winning, and the celebration dinner at the end of all of it, surrounded by people who raised their glasses to a man they were watching die. I thought about how I'd spent my whole life at the table because I was terrified that if I ever stood up from it, if I ever stopped proving and winning and building, I'd discover I was worth nothing, that the frightened kid above the laundromat had been right about himself all along. I'd deferred everything. Every small happiness, every quiet night, every ordinary joy, all of it postponed until the empire was finished, and the empire was never finished, and then it was too late. Someday I'll get a dog. I'd said that to the man who was killing me. It was, I realized now, the truest thing I'd ever said, and the saddest, because it meant that even at the very bottom of my heart, under all the towers, what I'd actually wanted was the smallest, warmest, most ordinary thing in the world, a creature to come home to, a life measured in walks and meals and someone glad to see you at the door. And I'd put it off, and put it off, and put it off, until a poisoned glass of champagne put it off forever. Except it hadn't. That was the joke of it, the beautiful, terrible joke the universe had told. I'd finally gotten my dog. I was the dog. And the someday I'd deferred my whole life had arrived at last, in the strangest possible shape, in a small, warm apartment with paint on the floor and my sister asleep on the couch with her hand on my back. A new life at a fresh table, with all the rounds still to play. Or this floor, this hand. This ordinary, unrepeatable, deferred forever, arrived at last peace. I thought about it for a long time, and then I stopped thinking, because it wasn't a thinking kind of choice. It never had been. And I understood at last that the smartest man in every room had spent his whole life mistaking the hard choice for the important one. I turned my head and I pressed my face into my sister's hand, and I made my choice. I'll stay, I told the light. Let the man go. I've been the man my whole life, and it got me poisoned at my own party. Let me be the dog. Let me be the small, warm, ordinary thing that comes home to her. She lost her brother and her mother and every certainty she had, and she is going to run a company full of people who want things from her, and she is going to need exactly one creature in her life who wants nothing from her at all, who is only, simply, always glad she's home. Let that be me. Let me forget the tower. I never liked it up there anyway. It was cold, and the view was of everyone I'd have to keep from taking it. Let me forget all of it. Just let me keep her. The light was quiet for a moment, and then, one last time, the words, "Then that is what you shall keep." Goodbye, Adam Thorne. You spent one life learning what mattered, and one strange week proving you'd finally learned it. Few souls ever get the second part. Go be someone's whole world. It is a better empire than the one you built. And the blue light folded shut like an eye closing, and went out, and never came back. I laid my head down on my sister's hand, and I slept. And somewhere in the sleeping, the first small piece of Adam Thorne washed quietly off the stone and out to sea, and I did not feel it go, because the system had promised it would be kind, and the system, for once, told the truth. The trials took the better part of a year, and I will tell you how they ended, because you've come this far and you're owed the ending, even though by the time they ended, I was already beginning to forget why they mattered. Gareth Stone was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and the attempted murder of Mateo Delgado. The nanny cam footage played in the courtroom, all of it, his own face in his own dead partner's living room saying this city's very dangerous for doctors who drink, and there is no cross-examination in the world that survives a jury watching you plan a second murder over a glass of the first victim's wine. The offshore accounts he'd been so proud of became the map of his own guilt. He got life, no parole. The last thing the cameras caught of him, being led out of the courthouse, was a man staring at nothing, and someone who was there said that all through the sentencing he kept looking around the gallery, scanning the faces, as if he were still, even then, searching for the thing that had moved against him in the dark and beaten him and that he had never once been able to see. He never found it. He never will. It was sitting in a warm apartment across the city, learning to forget his name. Eleanor took a deal in the end because Eleanor was always the practical one, testified against Gareth in exchange for a sentence that would let her out someday, an old woman with nothing. The fated shipping family turned out, as Gareth had spitefully predicted, to be a fiction. And there had, in fact, been a husband before me, a wealthy older man who died conveniently and quietly of an illness no one had thought to question. And once the prosecutors knew to look, they looked. And that is its own story and not mine to tell, except to say that Eleanor Thorne did not invent what she did to me. She'd done it before. I was just the biggest fish she ever landed, and the only one who ever came back. They say, Arthur told Chloe, and Chloe told the dog, who was by then only half listening, because the words boardroom and estate and even murder were starting to lose their edges for me. They say that at her sentencing, Eleanor was composed and dignified and perfect right up until the end. And then, as they led her out, she turned and looked back into the gallery, at Chloe, at the woman she'd tried to buy off with a check. And she didn't look at Chloe's face. She looked down, at Chloe's feet, at the dog sitting quietly beside my sister's chair. And whatever Eleanor saw there, or thought she saw, or had spent a year of sleepless nights unable to stop seeing, it broke the composure clean off her face. And the last thing anyone saw of the beautiful widow who'd toasted her husband's death was a woman being pulled from a courtroom, staring at a dog, whispering a name no one else could hear. Adam. She was saying Adam. She would say it, I think, for a long time. Some prisons don't have walls. She'd built hers herself the day she looked at a shivering stray and decided he'd be useful, and she would live inside it for the rest of her life. The exact, unprovable, unforgettable suspicion that the man she murdered had been in the room the whole time, watching, wagging his tail, remembering every word. You cannot appeal a haunting. There is no parole from a thing you can never quite prove you're right about. Good, I thought. The last clear, cold thought I remember thinking as Adam Thorne. Let her keep the one thing I couldn't take away. Let her keep the not knowing. It's heavier than any sentence a judge could hand down. And then, mercifully, gently, exactly as promised, I began to let the whole thing go. A year passed. I am going to tell you the end of it the way I experience it now, which is not the way a man tells a story, because I am not, anymore, entirely a man telling a story. The words are getting soft. The ledger is gone. I couldn't find it now if I tried, and I don't try. There are pieces I've kept and pieces that have washed away, and I've stopped being able to tell which is which, and this is the part the frightened man I used to be would never have believed. I don't mind. It turns out that letting go, the thing I feared my entire life, the thing I'd have called losing, is the most peaceful thing that has ever happened to me. Here is what I know now, a year on, in the small, warm shape of the life I chose. I know Chloe. I know her the way I know the sun comes up, completely, without effort, without needing a single reason. She runs a big building full of people now. I go with her some days and sleep under a desk that smells faintly of something I almost remember, cigar smoke, and old paper, and a burn mark in the corner. And I don't chase the almost memory. I just circle 3 times and lie down and wait for her to be done. She's good at the big building. People trust her. There are 3 older people who come to the meetings and keep everyone honest, and Chloe listens to them, and I've heard her say, more than once, "My brother set it up this way for a reason. He knew people better than he let on." She doesn't know I hear that. She doesn't know it lands somewhere in me and glows. I know Arthur. Arthur drives us now. He left the driving behind for a while after everything, and then Chloe asked him to come keep her safe, and he said yes before she finished the sentence.
Because Arthur pays his debts, and the debt had become a family. Every morning, when Arthur opens the car door for Chloe, I hop out first and I sit up, and I bring both my front paws to my chest and I hold them there, still, and I look up at him. I don't know why I do it. I couldn't tell you if you asked. I'm a dog, I can't tell you anything. But every single morning I do it, and every single morning Arthur stops whatever he's doing and his big weathered face goes soft, and he brings his own hand up to his brow, sharp from the elbow, a real one, and he holds it, and he looks down at me and he says, very quietly, so Chloe never quite catches it, "Morning, boss." And then he opens the door, and the day begins, and neither of us ever says a word about it, because some things are too true for words, and always were. I know Laura Wells a little. She comes to dinner sometimes, and she and Chloe have become the kind of friends who don't talk much and don't need to. And once, only once, Wells looked at me across the room for a long, professional, 19 years of instinct moment, and then she shook her head and said, "Nah," to no one, and had another glass of wine, and never said the thing she almost said, and I love her for it. And I know there is a watch on a shelf in Chloe's home, in a little glass case, a beautiful old thing that catches the light, and that every so often my sister takes it down and holds it and gets quiet, and that when she does, I go and sit beside her and lean my weight against her leg, and she puts her free hand on my head, and we stay like that, the two of us, and the watch, until the quiet passes. I don't know anymore why the watch matters. I've forgotten almost all of why. But I know that it matters to her, and that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. The rest of it, the tower, the champagne, the name in the whisper, the 400 million, the 9th richest man in the province, the rest of it has washed out to sea, just like the light said it would, kindly, over the long, soft months. And I have not gone looking for it, and I will not, because I finally understand the thing it took me 2 lives to learn. I spent the first one building an empire so that someday, when it was finished, I could finally rest and be loved for myself and come home to something warm. And the empire was never finished, so I never rested, and I was never loved for myself. And I never came home to anything warm until the day I died and woke up under a table on 4 paws and got, by the strangest mercy in the world, a second chance to choose the small thing over the large one. I chose the floor. I chose the hand. I chose to be someone's whole world instead of the whole world's richest stranger. And it is, exactly as the light promised, a better empire than the one I built. I reign over 1 apartment and 1 woman's happiness and 1 quiet morning salute, and I have never in either of my lives been so rich. People who knew me before, the few who ever really did, would not understand it. They'd look at what I am now, a dog asleep in a patch of afternoon sun on a paint-stained floor, and they'd see a fall. The 9th richest man in the province, brought down to this. They'd pity it. But that's the whole trick, isn't it? The one nobody tells you at the top of the tower. They measure your life by how far you can see from the height you've climbed, and they never once ask whether you're happy up there in the wind, or whether there's a single soul on the whole glittering floor below who'd cross the room for you if you had nothing left to give them. I could see the entire city from my old office. I could not have named 1 person in it who loved me. Now I can see exactly 1 room, and it contains the only creature who ever did, and she is humming to herself while she paints, and her hand keeps drifting down to rest on my back between brushstrokes without her even noticing she's doing it. And I would not trade this floor for that whole skyline, not for any number, not for all of it back. There is no exchange rate. That's the thing I finally understand. There was never an exchange rate between the two. I just spent 34 years pricing the wrong one. Sometimes at night, Chloe falls asleep on the couch with a book on her chest and her hand hanging down to rest on my back, the way she did the night I made my choice. And in the last soft moments before I sleep too, something almost surfaces. Some old shape, some far-off tide. A man in a tall, cold building who was afraid of exactly this, of being small, of being still, of being loved for nothing but himself. And I feel him, that frightened man I used to be, and I want to tell him it's all right. I want to tell him, you can stop now. You can put it down. It was never the tower. It was always going to be this, a warm floor and a hand, and someone glad you're home.
You got there. You got there in the end. It just took dying, and coming back wrong, and choosing, for once in your endless clever life, the thing your heart actually wanted instead of the thing you thought you had to win. And then the shape sinks back under, gentle, unmourned, and I put my head down on my sister's hand, and I sleep. And I am not Adam Thorne anymore. Not really. Not for much longer. And that is all right. I'm just her dog now. She calls me Adam. She never knew how right she was. And every morning I wake up glad, for no reason I could ever name or would ever want to, in the small, warm, ordinary world I would have traded the whole cold empire for, if only someone had told me, back at the top of that tower, that this was what I was actually building toward the entire time. They poisoned me at my own celebration dinner, and they laughed while they did it. They thought that was the end of me. It was the beginning of the only part of me that ever mattered. And the last thing I have to tell you, the only lesson I've got left before the words go soft for good, is the one my murderers learned too late, and I learned just in time. Be careful what you decide isn't watching you. Be careful what you decide doesn't count. The smallest thing in the room, the thing you named and fed and stopped noticing, the witness at your feet you were too certain to fear, that's the one who remembers everything. That's the one who's still here. Good boy, Chloe says when I come to the door to meet her every single evening, my whole body wagging, my whole heart hers. Good boy. Yes, finally, after everything. Yes, I am. The end.